work on our committee. I appreciate this group and the way this group operates in terms of we are going to do everything we possibly can that is in the best interest of Colorado football. So that's been the focus of this group for the last several years, and I anticipate we will continue with that focus in terms of making Colorado football better as a whole. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick roll call and get our meeting rolling this morning. So if you'll just be prepared to unmute and give us a hear, we go 5A down to 6-man. Danny Philman from Regis.
Yeah, I'm here.
Marty Tonjes from Horizon.
Here.
Bruce Gross from Vista Ridge.
Here.
John Sullivan, Vista Peak.
Here.
Autumn Sereno from Green Mountain.
Here.
Ryan Goddard from Pueblo South.
Here.
Luke DeWolf from Steamboat Springs.
Here.
Gary Geiger from TCA.
Here.
Frank Reeves from East Grand.
Here.
Greg Jones from Monte Vista. I thought we had Greg. We can't hear you.
You just can't hear him.
Okay. We'll let you work on your audio, Greg, but we cannot hear you. Jared Hinton from Gunnison.
Here.
Thanks, Jared. Brian Dermer from Moreno.
Here.
Mark Fowler from Mark Lowther from Fowler.
Here.
That's a mouthful. Scott Sorensen from Pete's is not with us today, and Joe Headley from Manzanola.
Here.
Good morning, Joe. Good to see you. Before we get into our opening comments, I publicly think we need to make sure that we take a second and recognize the work of Adam Bright, his assistant Sam Rogers, and Ryan Casey. When you think of what our fall season A football looked like, those folks did an absolutely outstanding job of hitting a moving target. And when I talk about a moving target, we're not talking about a target that appears on Monday and then also appears again on Friday. We're talking a target that seemed to move every 15 minutes. And so I can't tell you how much we appreciate your leadership. The folks that are on the screen know right now that during COVID times, every decision you make is going to have 50% approval and 50% non-approval. And I'm tipping my hat to you guys because ultimately season A went 1,000 times better than I thought it would go. I don't know how many games and matchups you created, Adam, on the fly Thursday afternoon for a Friday night game. But on behalf of the football committee, we appreciate your leadership, Adam and Ryan and Sam, and all the work that you guys put together. So on that note, I'm actually going to turn it over to you, Adam, for our orientation on what this meeting will look like this morning a little bit, especially since we're doing it virtual and YouTube and those kind of things, as well as for your state of the state address. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, guys. Season A in the fall wasn't the smoothest thing, but I appreciate Ryan and Sam. I think we did our best to try to look like a duck on the pond and try to appear calm and know our feet were working like crazy underneath the water. And I can 100% say I am glad that is behind us. We've got a spring season coming up. We'll get through that one, and then hopefully looking at this coming August, we can get back to a little bit more of a sense of normalcy. For this meeting, we do have the Zoom set up for our members of the committee. We will go forward and have our meeting through the Zoom process. We are being streamed on YouTube. We have a moderator there that when questions come up that are relevant to the conversation, we have a moderator that can check those questions and bring those forward to us if we need to call on the floor for questions at that time, just as we would in a normal setting, in a quote normal year. So with that, that's how we'll go through this process. If a vote is called for, we will do a roll call vote to make sure all those votes are recorded with the different, so we don't have people speaking over each other and all those things. We're trying to record the votes. As far as our state of the state, I was on a meeting this week and over the weekend at the national level, reviewing the NFHS football rules book with all the associations across the country. We still have 16 states that haven't played football yet. Hawaii is the first one that's announced they're not going to play football this year. So while our roadmap was not the easiest to follow on how we got fall football in, we're one of the lucky ones that were able to, and also being provided the opportunity for the schools that needed more time and needed to be able to play in the spring to provide them that opportunity, because it's all about providing opportunity for our kids to compete. And while the season doesn't look anywhere close to normal, it does provide us that opportunity. And I think that's the greatest thing that we can say that we accomplished, is we provided the opportunity. One of the things that was talked about over and over again in that national meeting was safety of football, and seeing some trends and different things. And one of the things I think you can see when you look at some national data is that the rules that have been put in place over the last several years have made this sport safer and safer. Taking out the blindside blocks and some things like that have made this sport safer and safer year over year the last 3 years, and continues to do that. The only rule that really got brought forward to change the rule book addressed safety. So our game is headed in the right direction. There's been a trend of lower numbers participating in football at the national level over the last 10 years. And in the last 24 months, that has stabilized, where we're not seeing the large amount of drop off. So I think the safety aspect to it, and getting out and messaging the safety piece of it and what we're doing to provide safety in this sport, has more kids sticking around. And the hope is that as we continue to do things, we can have more kids participate, and we can see that trend reverse and actually start to climb back up and get more kids participating in this sport. One of the other things that this season brought around was something we've been talking about kind of as a 3 or 4 year idea, was the single site championships. COVID brought that to us. It was something that was on our radar at some point potentially to explore. COVID forced our hands. I'm interested to see over the next 12 to 18 months what else we bring forward that COVID forced our hand on, that is something that we decide may be best for our sport and our state. That was also discussed at the national level. What things did we think weren't feasible that COVID forced our hand and made us do, and now we realize maybe it was better. What we think we couldn't even do, we've now decided is actually best for us. So I'm interested to see how that plays out over the coming months. With that, guys, we've got a fairly full agenda. And so what I'd like to do is just go ahead and we'll jump into that process. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hand it back over to Chris Knoll with 3.0 with the 2021 adjustments.
Sorry about that. I learned Tuesday how to use the mute button. So we're going to go ahead and start with the addition of game number 10 for 6-man. We've got some challenges there with our 6-man group. So Joe, I'm not sure if you want to address this, or if Adam, if that is you, but we need to discuss the adding of game number 10 for 6-man.
The 6-man association voted to add a game 10 so we could line our championship game with the 2A, 1A, and 8-man, anticipation of hopefully playing a neutral site championship game again.
So in essence, what you are asking for, Joe, is to add a 10th game to the 6-man schedule, is what is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, sir.
So what I think we would do in this situation is we would add a 10th game at the end of the season, so their schedules that are already built would remain untouched. We would add a game at the end. Schools can then fill that game if they choose to, or stay with their current schedule, but it would push the start of their postseason back 1 week to align with the other classifications, 8-man, 1A, and 2A. And it would not be a +1 situation like we had this fall where you could add something at the end. This would be something that has to be on your schedule at the beginning of the season. So it's not something you're coming through at the end and adding. It would be done in August, so you have a 10th game scheduled or not.
Giving them the ability to align their championships with those other classifications.
Correct.
Okay. Discussion from the group. When as we go through this, you guys, I'm just going to give you a couple seconds. Greg, do you want to test your microphone?
Am I back on now?
Yep, you're good now. So I'm just gonna, when I ask for discussion, I'm just gonna give it 15 seconds. I know it feels like that awkward pause, but I just want to make sure that we honor you and your opinion. So discussion on adding a 10th game for 6-man football. All right, not hearing any. I need a proposal or a motion. So Joe, I assume you're going to be the motion.
Yes, I make the motion that 6-man football be allowed a 10th game to align our championship with 2A, 1A, and 8-man football.
I second that motion.
From Bruce Gross from Vista Ridge on the second. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Bruce. Sam, can we do a roll call, please?
Yes. Chris Knoll,
I don't have a vote.
Danny Philman,
Yes, for me.
Marty Tonis,
Yes.
Bruce Gross, you second,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones,
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
and then Joe Healy, you motioned.
Let the record reflect that it passed unanimously. So congratulations to our 6-man group and the addition of that. And let's make sure that Adam, when I present this at Legislative Council, we need to make sure that we get it out there that it is not a +1, that needs scheduled from the get-go.
So I think what we'll do with this is we will create a time for a couple of members of this committee to go and meet with some of the 6-man guys so we can discuss this addition plus kind of just an outlook overall as to where our 6-man game is going and make sure that we're aligned as a football committee and as a 6-man group. So we'll schedule that in the coming weeks. If and when things slow down some, we'll try to schedule a meeting where we can get together and really discuss what this will look like for that level, as well as kind of just looking into the future and making sure that we're all good partners working together. So we'll schedule that in the next few weeks.
Great, thank you. As all of not only sport, but all of education is dealing with, we're going to have some fallout from the COVID and the impacts that it's had on our calendars and our schedules and those kind of things. As you know, we have 62, I believe is the number, Adam, playing in season C.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. Yes.
We have 62 schools that are going to be playing football in season C. So 62 schools that would be playing football up into May. And we need to have a discussion on our summer contact camps. Adam, I'll let you talk a little bit about, SMAC
Sure.
from the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, just in terms of some concerns that are coming up with kids having to play football in May and then immediately turning around and doing full contact camp. So Adam, I'll turn it over to you.
So as I mentioned earlier, there are still 16 states that have not played football yet this year. And there was concern at the national level from the National SMAC Committee about having student athletes play a spring football season and then turn around with a short window of time and play a fall season. We are in that position. One of the things that was brought up is if you are playing 6, 7, 8 games, something like that, and not trying to play your 10 to 12 games, there was a sigh of relief, I guess you could say, at the national level SMAC committee that they felt that was okay. They still had reservations, but they were okay with that. In the middle of that process, because we do have spring football with a 6-week season, we also have a 10-day contact camp that's in the middle of that. And if the National SMAC Committee is recommending that they have reservations about even playing in August, I don't think it's the best idea for us to say starting June 1st, after having just completed a season, that we turn around and have a 10-day contact camp for those teams. Because of that, if that's our stance, we now have an equity issue between those 60 schools and the schools that played in the fall. So that's the reason for the conversation that we need to discuss the safety piece as well as the equity piece. And then Chris, you kind of have a thought here on what we can do. I can propose that. You kind of tell me how you'd like to direct this.
I would like for you, please, to discuss the idea at this point in time. And then if that's something, that will lead us at least into some discussion as a committee. And if that needs to become a proposal at that time, then that's the path we'll go down. But if you don't mind, go ahead and present that idea and just talk about it a little bit.
Okay. So in looking at our calendar and with the idea that we have a safety and equity issue on our hands, we need to make some adjustments to where we can still feel like we are providing the opportunities for our kids and their coaches to be able to have that practice time, but also taking safety into consideration. So this coming August, practice is scheduled to start right now on August 9th is the way the calendar breaks out. The proposal would be that we start football practice on August 2nd. Between August 2nd and August 9th, it would be helmets only, no contact, but it can be official practice in our normal practice rules. The timelines, everything we have there would be the same as the traditional year. Then when we come back on the 9th, the Monday, which would have been the original start, we can now go into pads with no player-to-player contact for 2 days. So then on that Wednesday would be in full pads. That provides us the opportunity to get the work in we would in those padded camps, also providing the opportunity for our student athletes to recover from spring, make sure there's an equity piece there, as well as our spring sports are going to be going through the end of June. July is going to be a crazy hectic month for our student athletes when they're trying to get all of their summer work in with their different teams. This provides an opportunity for our students to go and do that for the other sports. Football can step aside, as you will, for the month of July and get going in August. In doing this, we would also be able to add a second scrimmage for football. So you'd be looking at the 14th would be your first scrimmage date. And then you could scrimmage again the next week. And then you would roll into your season after that. So your official dates would be August 2nd would be practice. August 9th would be full pads, no contact. August 11th would be full contact. August 14th, you could do a scrimmage. And then you could do a scrimmage again the following week on the 19th, 20th, or 21st. And then your games would start. The first day of competition would be August 26th. And then next year will be the second year of the current cycle. I know year one of this cycle has been blown to pieces, but if you remember back 18 months or so, you built a schedule that was a 2-year cycle schedule. We will play year 2 of that schedule. And the starting date for that first week of competition would be August the 26th.
Sam, can you please make sure that as a part of our committee report, one of the informational items, I don't know where we want to put it, but one of the informational items is that we are just going to have, that this is going to be year 2 of the cycle. I just want to make sure we draw people's attention to that. I know we've already got athletic directors asking about it. So if we could just make note of that somewhere in the committee report, that would be, thanks, Sam. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Some conversation regarding what Adam just brought out.
Chris, I want to just confirm something. This would mean that we just don't have contact, but teams are still allowed to practice if they want, just without contact, correct?
Correct. So you would use your normal summertime rules that you would traditionally use outside of that 10-day window where you have your 10-day padded camp. So if you want to get together and do 7-on-7 or any of those type of drills, that's still allowed. Just your actual non-voluntary practices. So your actual practice start date would be the 2nd as opposed to the 9th. And you would not have that 10-day padded camp during the summertime. You can still do your non-padded camp. You can still do your work that you normally would in your 7-on-7 and those types of things.
Adam, can you talk a little bit about other fall sports and what, like volleyball and those? I know everything's different, but to have a different start date of practice, what would those bring about, equity issues or anything like that?
So the start date would actually align with where boys golf currently starts. So they start on that date. So we are aligning with another sport that's already there. And in doing so, that's where I feel like the precedent's already there that we have a sport that starts there. We can bring that to the equity committee and see if that's something that they would want to address. We're also not putting limits on what volleyball can do during the summer, whereas this would be putting limits on this sport for the summer. So I think we could potentially have a way to work around any perceived equity issue there because we're not regulating volleyball in their summer camps and things of that nature.
Adam, would this be a 1-year deal for football, assuming that we go back to normal starting next fall?
Yes, with the large assumption that things get back to normal, or some semblance of normal, this would be for a 1-year period. And then if it's something that we actually like the program, that's something this group can meet about at the end of next year after the football season and see if that's something we want to move forward with. But this would be a proposal for this year only, because this year we have the safety and equity piece to work around.
And Adam, just to clarify, for starting first week of August, we'd have 5 days of non-contact. So would that be just 5 days of helmets, or would that be that 3 days of helmets and 2 days of shoulder pads with no player-to-player contact?
No, so you could technically get 6 practices in. You could go Monday through Saturday. Those would be helmets only. When you return on Monday, August 9th, you would have those 2 days of full pads but no contact. So half pack, as we used to call it. So you would have those 2 days of half. And then on Wednesday of that second week, that's when you'd go full with full contact.
Okay.
And Adam, I don't know if we want to put anything in there, but this is based on the precedent with COVID, and also because we have 2 seasons this year versus hopefully next year having a single season.
Correct. So this would be put in place for this summer only, because we have 2 seasons. And with those 2 seasons, we have a safety concern because of the spring teams. And so therefore, with a safety concern, we don't want to go and penalize spring teams and say they cannot have a 10-day padded camp. So therefore, we have an equity issue. And so what this would apply to all of our padded team camps, which would include any camp that you were to attend that has contact. So whether you're hosting your own or going to a college or university to have a padded camp, those would not be allowed this summer because of the equity and the safety piece. And so for this summer, we would just start practice a week earlier and not have those padded camps.
Adam, would you foresee any logistical issues with starting that early in terms of ADs maybe not being back? I mean, I would guess that you would need to then do registration in June, get kids registered to play, and open up the school and do all those things. And maybe for small schools, maybe there's some feedback on the committee. Does this put undue strain or strain on schools coming back that early, just in terms of getting this started so early?
We started this early 2 years ago, didn't we?
Before the calendar flipped. Yeah, the first year we went and aligned with the NFHS calendar, we did start this early. And we have I know not every sport has golf, but we do have the teams that do have golf are starting at that same time. So ADs are that whatever. I mean, I know there are a larger number of football players than there are on a golf team, traditionally speaking. So the workload is different, but we do have our golfers that are getting registered and competing at that time.
Adam, just touch base again on just that progression. Is there a way to, I mean, I guess what's the reasoning for not doing that progression that first week and being ready to go on that Monday? Because if you're going to do a scrimmage that first week on that, the week of the 13th or 14th that week. I mean, if your first day of contact is Wednesday and you're going to scrimmage another team on a, Thursday or Friday or Saturday, that's not a lot of time to really, get guys used to pads. So, I guess what's the rationale behind not being able to get the progression out of the way the first week and then start contact so we can, be doing tackling and stuff like that the first or that second week, just so they're ready. We feel like these coaches will be ready for that scrimmage at the end of the week.
So I would say that's something that can be a discussion for the group. The slower ramp up than normal would be because we are still dealing with teams coming off of just having a season. And so there's going to be, I still have safety concerns for kids that were playing into the middle of May, turn around and having contact that quickly. So we're giving them an opportunity to get out and get the movement in. Is really my first thought. Second thought on a scrimmage, that's for providing you the opportunity to have a scrimmage. Nothing says you have to have 2. You could only have 1. Secondly, your first scrimmage could be much more of a controlled scrimmage where you're going more, I would think more essentially 2 teams almost practicing together where it's all controlled situations. So we can not be going out and having a, up and down the field type situation. We can really work on individual aspects of the game, but against another team. And maybe that is going through tackling drills and things of that nature. And then you have your second scrimmage, which is more your traditional scrimmage. So not to say you can't do a traditional scrimmage on that first one, but I also think it's a way to think of it differently. It's a way to get some work in that you would have gotten at your 10-day camp. Some of that work you would have gotten there. It's a way to do that during that period, and then still have your normal scrimmage that you had for the second one. Is how I view it. Not to say that I'm 100% right on how I'm viewing it, but that's how I viewed it. Was the first one would be more of a situational work type scrimmage. The second one would be your more traditional scrimmage, while providing those teams that have played into mid-May, providing them a slower ramp up period to get the work in, because we haven't done as much stuff over the summer as we traditionally do.
Adam, the one thing that I think I will add to this is that it provides a greater equity for all teams across all classifications. I think it provides equity for all teams, that may be dealing with different protocols throughout their district. And I think that was something that coaches really discussed. And as we went through this last year, was that there was a great desire for equity regarding the summer. And I think this, in 21 is a great time to hit reset with the safety of student athletes in mind, and the growth of our game, still keeping that at the forefront as well. But I think it's a great time to hit reset, get everyone on the same page going forward, give the opportunity to explore this first week a little bit earlier, and hopefully, like we've all said, get back to some sense of normalcy leading into 21.
Other discussion? All right. So as you know, we would need a motion, and it can't come from Adam or myself. So there would need to be a motion on the floor. And I think the motion would need to clarify some of Danny's concerns in terms of what that first week looks like when we go to half racks, et cetera.
I would motion that for the 2021 summer that there's no contact camp. Practice starts August 2nd with a progression to full pads no later than August 11th, with 2 scrimmages to follow.
I'll second that.
Okay. Further discussion before we go to a vote? Sam, can you please do a roll call?
Yes. Hi. Sorry. Danny Phileman,
Yes.
Marty Tonis,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
and John Sullivan, you motioned. Autumn Sereno.
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones, you second, correct?
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
and Joe Healy.
Yes.
Let the record reflect it passes unanimous. And Sam, as we go forward, I'm going to request that if somebody brought the motion up or seconded it, that they still have to say either yes or no. Somebody might be bringing that up. They might second it just so it gets a vote, but they might not want to be the yes vote. So if you guys could just make sure that you say yes or no, even if you made the motion or seconded the motion. So thank you. Moving right along, season date review. Mr. Bright, you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Yep. So our new season dates now will be 8/2 will be the start of practice. That'll be helmets only until 8/9. On 8/9, you'll come in and you will have 8, 9, 10, and 11 would be your to follow our same pattern. We would actually, our motion was just to have we need to, Chris, we need to see, our motion was to start on the 11th. We'd be getting full pads with full contact. We would go 9, 10, 11, be on the 12th is when full contact would start. If we were to follow the traditional progression. So it'd be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3 days with the full, but no contact. Sorry, I'm getting my days wrong here. Sorry, I'm looking at a calendar here. So we are good. We would have 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so August 9th and 10th would be full pads with no player contact. August 11th, then we would start with our full contact with player to player. And then you would be looking at August 26th would be your first scheduled contest. And then with the addition of the week into 6-man, 11/28 would be the championship Saturday for 6-man, 8-man, 1A, 2A. December 5th would be your championship dates for 3A, 4A, and 5A.
Anybody have any questions on those dates? Does he need to repeat them one more time for you?
And the championship dates are off a day. I'm reading off of our calendar here, but it's got that's a Sunday. So it'd be 12/4. 12/4 would be your championship for 3, 4, and 5. And 11/27 would be your championship date for 6, 8, 1, and 2. So the 27th and the 4th.
Are you guys good on that, or do you need him to repeat those dates one more time? Okay, so we need to have a motion to approve those dates.
Those are the dates by the calendar. So I'm just doing this as a review.
Okay.
Those are the dates on the. Other than Ryan, we need to go through and change a couple of things on our TASA calendar.
Yeah.
We got some Sundays listed on there. Other than that, those are the dates. We'll make those appropriate changes based on the 6-man change and then based on the practice dates changing now. So we will change those dates on that calendar. I just wanted to review with that passed, those are your dates. So 8/2 practice starts, 8/9 practice with protective equipment for 2 days. So then on Wednesday, 8/11, you can now have player to player contact. And then 8/26 will be when contests start. Your first scrimmage date off of that new calendar then would be August. I would say August 14th, you could have a Saturday scrimmage. So that would be, you'd have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, full pads, full player to player contact. The 14th would be the first available date you could have a scrimmage. Your second scrimmage date then would be starting on August 19th, 20th, or 21st. Contest would start August 26th, 27th, or 28th. And again, going back to year number 2 of the 2-year cycle schedule.
Questions or concerns on that?
Can you say the first date for the scrimmages again? The 13th or 14th, or just the Saturday? What was the first?
I would do we're going to say Saturday. So that's what will officially come out is August 14th is when you can have your first scrimmage. So you get 3 full practices in with your team and full pad, full contact. Saturday the 14th is when scrimmages would occur. If you wanted to have your first scrimmage the next week, you could use your scrimmage on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday.
I'd like to ask if we can review just a little bit the end of the season because of how, for instance, if you have a 9-game season like 2A football, that we're playing a game, then we have a bye week, and then we're playing, and then we have a first round of the playoffs. Can we look at the calendar and see if we can look at the first round playoff dates based on this new policy and scrimmages? Can we take a few minutes to look at that?
As far as, sorry, I guess explain a little better. I'm
Look
not
at
sure what
the-
you're asking.
Well, looking at the end of the season for 6, 8, 1A and 2A, and the first round playoff game that weekend.
The season would end, let me confirm.
Yeah, I'm looking at my NFHS weeks and I'm trying to make sure we lock that in.
So our season would end on the 30th of October. Is the date that I have. So then your first round playoff games technically could start November 4th. Not many people are playing a Thursday playoff game, but it could start on the 4th. So it'd be 4, 5, 6 would be your first round games. Except for 3A. 3A first round, 3A would end their season November 4, 5, 6. The first round of playoff games for 3A would be on November 11, 12, 13. Remember, 3A has 11 weeks to play 10 games. 4A and 5A have 10 weeks to play 10 games. 2A and below have 10 weeks to play 9 games. Or now with what we've made the adjustment there for 6-man.
Does that answer that, Gary?
Yes.
We haven't made any changes to the postseason. We're rolling just as it should have been. All we've done is change the beginning, having the what is now technically your second scrimmage would be taking place when your first and only scrimmage would have happened in a normal calendar.
Okay. Other questions or concerns on calendar, folks? All right. Hearing none, we're going to move on to 3.4 championships and sites and those kind of things. And, Adam, I've got to tell you that your guys' work with pulling all championships down to CSU Pueblo, I think we need to publicly thank Colorado State, Pueblo, and the city of Pueblo, and the Friends of Football and anyone and everyone that worked on pulling that event off. What an absolute spectacular 3 days for Colorado football and showcasing our product and those kind of things. So well done on that. And I will let you talk a little bit about championships as we move forward.
What we're going to need to decide here real quick is for this will be for this coming year. So this will be for, again, this 21 fall season. We have contracts for where 2A, 3A, 4A, and 5A are played, with 2A aligning with where 1A, 8-man, and now 6-man will finish. We can look at using a single site again, such as a CSU Pueblo, to host those 4 games. 3A would come back the following weekend to the same location per the contract. 4A and 5A still have seasons left on their contract at Bronco Stadium. So we need to discuss and see if that is the movement we want to make now that we are aligned with 2A through 6-man to have those games at a single neutral site.
Thoughts? Discussion?
I heard a lot of positive feedback from the single site state championship games that were, the necessity this year, both from coaches and just from, people that were talking about it. Obviously, the city of Pueblo was very excited to host those, and a lot of good conversations came from, the stuff down here in Southern Colorado. There was a lot of excitement about the single site state championship and how each classification and each game, had its own spotlight, and that was able to see and display Colorado high school football in all classifications. and give them the opportunity to shine in their single moment there.
Thanks, Ryan.
I think given those sites for all the schools, it just makes that state championship just a little more special for those kids and players. And like Ryan says, it just a lot of positive feedback. So no matter what division, we make it a great experience for those kids, and that's what it's all about. So I'll be all in favor of those, just that single sites.
So does this need a motion and a vote, Adam?
Yes, because we would be bringing in 1A, 8-man, and 6-man into that same site as 2A to create that single site weekend for those 4 games. And then we would turn around and have 3A the next weekend.
Okay. So do we have further discussion?
Adam, can you explain the sites one more time just for, is the Bronco Stadium still for?
We have some years left on that contract for 4A and 5A. So those would remain there until such time that contract is up, and we need to begin further discussions as to where we would be going and what that would look like. I can tell you, not to speak for them, but the likelihood of them wanting to host 7+ games on a grass field in December is not a very high likelihood of them agreeing to have a single site for all of those games. They do have a product they put on the field that they value more than ours, and messing up their field is not real high on their priority list to have that many games on that field. But we do have years left on that contract for 4A and 5A. So this motion will be for this year only, because of the second year of the cycle. We have the opportunity to bring 1A, 8-man, and 6-man to Pueblo at the same time that 2A is already there under contract. So we can have those 4 games there and continue the momentum of the single site type of event.
But for future, if we did single site, it could be, or maybe a neutral site going, not this coming year, but just trying to maybe keep that Broncos relationship, down the road and seeing how many we can host there.
Right. That's up for discussion as we get closer into when those contracts are expiring.
Perfect.
And you're
Can you clarify as to why 3A is coming back the following weekend?
Right now they end the same time as 4A and 5A. 3A has the 11 weeks to play 10 games. So until earlier, we had 3 different weekends of championship football with 6-man ending earlier. Now that 6-man ends at the same time, now we have 2 weekends. Our contracts have been written where 3A is at Pueblo and 2A is at Pueblo. So we would amend that contract to be able to allow 1A, 8-man, and 6-man there. 3A would stay there the following weekend.
Thank you.
And Adam, we are talking that when we start discussing one site, we're talking not just CSU Pueblo, but potentially a Fort Collins, potentially.
Sure. If that's something the committee decides we want to look at doing going forward, we'll explore all options we have and find a place where we can have the best experience, but also, it's got to be the best thing for our association and our membership as well. So we'll explore everything. We have 2 or 3 years until we're to that point. So I know we're all thinking in the future, and we liked what happened this fall, but that's also something that's out there a ways for us to look at and dream about. We've got some time to work on that piece.
We got some paper issues in terms of contracts in between.
Correct.
Now and then. Okay. Great. Further discussion?
Just one more question, Adam. Is this, it's probably logistical a little bit, but that second weekend where you have the 3A, 4A, 5A, does each of those games kind of have its own time and its own, spotlight, I guess?
So I'm not following, sorry.
So like in years past, 2 years ago, when you look at the times, it would have been 11 o'clock, 4A kickoff, a 1 o'clock, 3A kickoff at CSU Pueblo, and then a 2:30, I believe, 5A kickoff back at Mile High. Would that be similar, or would the times be adjusted so that each?
That's up to us. We can make those adjustments as needed. My assumption is we're going along with how do we get the right kind of coverage on networks and different things to try to have all those games produced with the quality we had this year. So yes, we can make those adjustments to make sure that we don't have any interference between those 3 games.
Good deal.
Okay, so at this time, we need a motion. Adam, can you summarize one more time, just to make sure we're on the same page? And then if somebody wants to literally just steal that motion, you're more than happy to.
So what we're looking at doing is just changing 1A, 8-man, and 6-man to have their championship sites coincide with where 2A currently has their championship for the 2021 fall season.
And then where is 3A for the 21 season?
They're already under contract, so they're not changing. They're at Pueblo.
Okay, great.
The only
Thank
changes
you.
we're making is 1A, 8-man, 6-man. Everybody else is already under contract where they would be going.
Perfect. I need a motion.
I move that 6-man, 8-man, and 1A football have the same neutral site state championship as 2A for the 2021 fall season.
I'll
Thanks,
second
Chris.
that motion.
So the second from, so motion was from Jared Hinton, second from Brian Dermer. Any other further discussion? Sam, a roll call, please.
All right, here we go. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tonis,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes, sorry, I can't hit the mute button.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Serena,
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones,
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
and Joe Healy.
Yes.
Perfect. We will see you guys in Pueblo. Go ahead, Chris.
No, you're good. The motion passes unanimously, and that excites me. I think that is going to continue to build a little bit of momentum with us looking at a one site in the future. So thank you for that. Mr. Bright, we are at 9:52. We're 52 minutes in, and I am anticipating 4.0 being a rather lengthy discussion. With these Zoom committee meetings and those kind of things, do we need to take a 5-minute break to let folks do what they need to do, whatever else? Or do we just keep plowing forward and they do that when, yeah, you know what I'm asking here?
I'm okay if we want to say we're going to take a quick break here. I showed 9:53. We come back at, do we want to just go ahead and make it even 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock.
Okay,
Fantastic.
we'll see everybody in 7 minutes.
All right, thanks, guys. All right, it looks like people are rejoining us. I'll just sort of wait for those cameras to pop back on. I feel like teacher nowadays. I feel like a teacher, hey, let's power up those cameras, boys and girls. Let's re-engage. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get us going. And Adam, I just want to make sure, because I got a phone call back to our summer contact camps. This is for and if we need to revisit it, I want to make sure we do it now while we're in committee rather than 2 months from now and scrambling. This does not include our incoming ninth graders or our eighth graders finishing. We had a discussion at one point in time. Does this include our incoming ninth graders because they've been on a different schedule or not? And so I just want to revisit that because I think we talked about it earlier. So thoughts?
So what we pushed forward was not having any summer contact camps. We did have discussion about eighth graders originally. The question we have there is it is very difficult for us to know who played a spring season, who didn't, who did club ball, all those different things. This makes it clean where everybody starts on August 2nd, regardless of what organization they were with in the spring.
Okay. And we're good with that, guys?
Hey, really quick before we go back, Sam, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here.
My last name is pronounced Tonjes.
Got it.
I don't want to sound rude or nothing, but my phone's blowing up and I'm trying to take notes and I'm like, I've been called worse, but
Got it.
thank you.
Marty, don't think you're special. It's not like mine's ever pronounced correctly either.
If I could just focus, that'd be amazing.
Anjus, Sereno,
Yes.
let's go through.
I appreciate it.
Well, and let's be honest, I call both of you a lot worse than that. So we're just going to leave that and we're going to go ahead and proceed. Autumn, we're just calling you coach. So let's go ahead and proceed, guys. We are on to 4.0 classifications. We are going to talk about adding a 6A. And before we get rolling on this and before I turn it over to Adam for his presentation, I really want to emphasize, and you guys do a great job. Number one, that's why you're on this committee. But I want you to take a step back as we start talking about 6A and classification and those kind of things. And take that step back and realize you are a football committee member right now. You are not representing your school, but you are representing football for the state of Colorado. So as we go through this, don't think schools, think philosophical, think of concept as we go down this road together and have this discussion, because I think that's going to help us really make some decisions on what's best for Colorado football rather than I'm just thinking about this one or two schools. Where does this one or two schools fit in a 6A classification type of deal? So I appreciate that in advance. Mr. Bright, it's all yours. 4.0.
Okay, 4.0 football classifications. It is this time of year, this time of the TASA calendar where it is time to begin building classifications for the next cycle. Our clock meeting is coming up around the corner relatively quickly. So it's time for us to go through and build leagues, but also look at classifications. And so with the timing of that, what we're noticing, at least from my office, is we don't have in every classification potentially the greatest amount of equitable distribution of programs. And so we began to look at what can we do to address some of that. We still have programs that are consistently well below 500. And we have programs in the same classification that are consistently well above 500. And we need to figure out some type of system that can help us place programs where they need to be, where they're competing against like programs. And I'm very intentional in using the words program as opposed to like school. I know that we can go through and there's lots of data there where we can put together like schools. But just because we look the same as who's walking in the door, if one school has been historically, let's just use a 4-year number. If one school is 0-40 and the other school went 40-0, they may be like schools, but they're not like programs. And so we've got to go through and figure out how do we create some equity amongst our classifications. One of the things that we have the ability to do is to go through and look not just simply at the number of kids that walk through the front door, because I don't believe that simply counting the number of heads that walk through the door is a way for us to classify like programs. We can have two schools that both have 2,000 students walk in the door. One of them could be the 40-0 school. The other one could be the 0-40 school. And to say that they're similar programs may not be doing, maybe that may be a disservice to one of the programs, if not both of the programs, to say that they're like programs. And so it was with that in mind that we began to figure out how would we go about doing this. One of the ways that we've looked at in the proposal that I would want to bring to the committee to go through and discuss is adding a 6th classification. Now, I know in 1993 we had a 6A, and I know in my 8 years in Colorado, I've seen several groups of coaches show up to legislative council proposing 6A. In those proposals, those didn't come through the committee. Those were brought directly to legislative council. And I don't know that those always had an equitable distribution as the central focus of why a 6A was created from 1A through 6A. And so what we're looking at doing is trying to figure out a way to make that more equitable. And so right now in 11-man football, we have 5 classifications, each of them with 40, 41, 42 schools, depending on the exact classification you're looking at. But essentially we have 5 classifications of 42 schools. What we'd like to look at doing is going to 6 classifications with 36 schools in each classification. But again, not looking simply at the number of students that walk in a door. Let's look at programs and like programs and where you should be at. And in doing so, what we're able to accomplish is we can place those schools that have been placed in alternative leagues to play similar opponents, but then have restrictions on their postseason eligibility because they've been placed in that alternative league. We can place them where they need to be. And maybe an alternative league in 5A really shouldn't be playing 5A. Maybe they should be down a classification, but because we've looked at the numbers that walk through the door, maybe that's not where they should be placed. And let's place them with like schools and like programs. And so this scenario, what we'd be looking at doing is if you're in the top 6 to 8 teams in a classification, and we're using 4 years worth of data that we have from your max preps rankings, your Packard rankings, your RPI. We can look at your win-loss records. We have all that information. We have the data now to go through and try to find from the competitive standpoint. We can also use our free and reduced. We can see if there's ways to dive into finding open enrollment numbers if we can, if that's a piece that we need to add to it. We have data now that we can use to go through and try to accurately place programs. One of the things we have to look at in doing so is what our definition of success is. Is success simply because you won it or made it to the finals or made it to the semifinals? Is it you got in the playoffs? Some of our team's success may be because they won a game or they had a winning streak or they got to 500. There are different versions of success based on where our programs are at currently and historically. And so we've got to go through and figure out what is best for all of our programs. And so when we talk about if I'm one of those 6 schools in a classification that's going to get moved up, that doesn't mean that I'm getting moved up so that I can go lose all my games, because we're also now going, the top end of that classification has moved up to the next classification. So if you think starting at the bottom, we're going to be moving schools all the way up until we move 36 schools into 6A. And so there is a movement as we move people through. And so my thought and rationale on this is that a top 6 program in one classification can compete and be successful against the middle of the pack in the next classification up, historically speaking. Yes, we can all think of an individual team that we've been a part of or that we coach or an individual school, all those things. We can think of that and think, man, we wouldn't have been able to. But if we look at a global viewpoint, if I have 6 teams and I, we used an example the other day, in just about every classification, I can go through and say, write down the top 10 teams in that classification for next year. And if you're involved in that classification, the odds are we're going to have a list that's pretty close to each other because we know who those teams are. We could also, my guess is, turn around and say, who are the bottom 10 teams in that classification? And our list would probably look pretty similar as well. And to say that those are equitable programs, when we can know historically exactly where they are. Maybe that's not the case. And so I would like to just be able to look at how do we go through, redistribute in a group of 36 as opposed to 42. Potentially there's a way there to create some more equity amongst that group because we're able to put like teams together or like programs together so that we can have competitive balance. I know that's something we've talked about. I've heard it for the 8 years I've been here, is working, how do we get towards competitive balance? My hope is that in looking deeper in the numbers and really looking at where programs are, where they're trending, we could also look at their enrollment numbers to a certain extent, where they're trending as well. We've got a lot of those pieces that are available to us in the bylaws to go through and look at how do we want to make our classifications. And getting into 36, hopefully that provides more equity because we've got a smaller number of teams in a group to try to match together. So that's kind of the long-winded version of what we're looking to try to accomplish. Chris, I'll turn it over to you to kind of run through comments and then fire away questions, et cetera, and we can have our conversation get started. But I will echo what Chris said. Hopefully the main focus of this conversation is not on your particular school, your particular team, but it's looking at the stated goal that I gave you guys in an email a couple weeks ago is how do we grow the sport of football in Colorado? How do we get competitive equity where we can try to shoot for the goal of saying that Colorado is a top 5 state in the country for high school football? And if we've got that lofty goal as a 10-year goal out there, we've got to create those steps to get there. In my mind, this is one of those steps that gets us there, along with some of the other work we've done already today. So with that, go ahead, Chris.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate that. And the committee obviously you knew this was coming. And so I've had some time to marinate on it, think about it a little bit. So just going to open it up to you guys at this time. Just unmute and run with comments and questions and have at it.
I'm gonna chime in on this one. I know that basketball is looking at 6A as well, or 6 classifications as well. When you look at it and break down the numbers, I guess it doesn't make sense to me. And I am very well aware that there are, some schools that are very, very much at the top, and we see them in championships over and over again. I understand that. I think that there's probably a better way than making a 6 classification. So a little perspective, the state of Texas has over 1,200 high schools that have football. We have 278 that have football. Okay. And they have 6 classifications, but if you actually break it down, they actually have 11 classifications with their divisions and everything. We have 7, including 6-man and 8-man. So really, when you're looking at the numbers, it doesn't make sense. And I say Texas because it seems like we compare to Texas quite often. And I'm not sure that we're a state that should be comparing to Texas because we are very different. New York, 768 schools have football. They have 5 classifications. Florida, they have 748 high schools that have football. They have 8 classifications. So perspective wise, I'm not sure that that's the answer. And again, I do agree with needing to have light schools, like programs, have a better balance. I just think that there's probably a better way to do that. And I would say that for every sport. I'm not looking at just football here. Yes, we're talking about football today, but I'm also thinking overall in the state of Colorado, we're not a very huge state. I do understand geography and things like that. Other states, deal with that as well. But that's just kind of my perspective. Is I'm not sure that that's the answer. I think that there needs to be something, maybe a little adjustment there, but I'm not sure that adding a whole other classification is the answer for it.
Thanks, Autumn. Appreciate that. And I'm assuming that was your dog. So moving right along.
I'm really, really sorry. Of course, when I start talking, it's a punk.
No, you're good. You're good. Further discussion and comments and thoughts. This is one that we need to make sure that we have some solid discussion. Bruce?
Yeah, I think moving to a 6A classification, I understand where Autumn's coming from on that, but I think it's a start to the process. And as Adam shared earlier, I think as we decide moving from the typical, everybody's been in different states probably at some point. I spent a lot of time coaching in Kansas at one point as well. There's 6A classification. And so And again, small in numbers as far as numbers of high schools that play football. But I think it's the start of creating classifications that again are like programs and not just numbers. Because all along we've always just divided pretty much by numbers to determine classifications. And I think we need to reevaluate that process. And I think this is the right step to moving forward in evaluating those processes to help create more equity within the programs.
Thanks,
I would
Bruce.
agree. I would agree with Bruce. I just think that this is a platform. Adding this 6A classification gives us a platform as long as we work in the context that Adam is alluding to. And I think the bylaws 1500.2 allow for that to occur, to really reinvent football and to allow for that competitive equity that we keep talking about. So I think this is a definite step in the right direction.
Thank you, Luke.
I agree with all of that as well. I think that I mean, it seems like it's following along with basketball, and hockey actually added 4A. You know, it didn't, you know, this year they didn't add the 6A, but they added a separate division to kind of separate and give some more equity there. I think we get hung up on the 6 number a lot of times. There've been a couple other places where that 6 got added, and that's like, whoa, it's a 6A. Well, it's just, you know, we're creating another classification to spread some things out and I mean, the equity piece and the opportunity. I mean, really what you're doing too is you're giving more teams the opportunity to be in the playoffs. So whether we did that just by simply expanding the playoffs and the classifications that we already have, or we do that by adding a 6A, you know, to that, it's given a bunch more opportunities, in my opinion, to spread things out. And I think that's good for those teams that need it.
Good points. Thanks, Jared. And yes, we did add a 4A hockey that I think for the most part people are very, very excited for.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Except for like what Adam said, you know, you're going to have some teams that are on the bottom of that 5A that are like, dang, I don't want to be on the bottom of, and we're talking hockey. I don't want to be the last 2 in 5A. I'd rather be the top 2 in 4A, but anytime we have to draw a line, that's going to be the case. So thank you for that input, Jared. I appreciate that.
How would 6-man football be affected by these changes?
I'm not gonna mandate a school go play 6-man if they've never seen it before. It's a special game. So is 8-man. So those are going to be, this conversation will be revolving around those that are playing 11-man football. If we have a school whose enrollment number gets to a certain point where 8-man becomes an option, or if an 8-man school is continuing to see their students leave and they need to make a choice and be able to go play 6-man, those options are still going to be there. But we're not going to dictate an 11-man school that has no idea what an 8-man or a 6-man game looks like. They are different games. Those that watched when we were in Pueblo this year that got exposed to those games for the first time can understand those are different games. So I believe schools that are 1A schools right now that are seeing a decline in enrollment that want to make that choice would still be there, just like it always is. But I don't believe we dictate somebody have to go play that game.
I think I see Autumn's point and Bruce's point as well. And to be honest, I think we're really hung up on the 5A, 6A portion, but I think the bigger question is more dealing with how we classify the schools. And I understand what Luke's saying with there is a way in the bylaws, but to me, that's not happening right now. And I think we can step in and we can make an adjustment where instead of schools going through the bylaw system, it's set up in a way where if we look at open enrollment numbers, we look at free and reduced lunch, participation numbers, and obviously base enrollment's important. And you know, I think all those play into factors on how schools are trending. If we take a deep dive in those numbers, I think they would bear it out. So I think looking more at how teams are classified might be a better way to go rather than getting hung up on the 5A, 6A thing. I don't see how, going to Autumn's point, adding another classification really changes a whole lot right now, unless we figure out who's in the correct classification.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, is not that we don't need to make a change, because we absolutely do need, there is something that needs to occur, but you're right, John, the how we're classifying, how we're dropping people into those classifications or schools in those classifications. I think that there's just a better way to do it and still be equitable and still, get people in the right place with like schools. I think we can do that. And again, we're never, ever going to get rid of, some programs that are just always top tier. Like it's just not a thing that's ever going to go away. It may change here and there, who's at the top, but yeah, I'm very much about like, let's figure out a better way to classify these schools, our schools.
Yeah, and I would say we're going to have our top teams and our bottom teams no matter what we do, but I think more is that middle area, and are we consistently playing teams that are, again, or programs that are similar, matching up programs that are similar to each other.
And I guess, I have a couple things to add here. One, I think there's this huge consensus from coaches, athletic directors, players across the state, that we need like programs playing each other. We've got to find the best data, to get those like programs to play each other. We've also had, these situations where we've had these leagues that have been built, that we need to look at and examine those and how we get everyone more success. How do we build our programs to be more successful? How do we do that as coaches? How do we do that as athletic directors? One of the things I think builds success, in an overview of the program and in an overview and a global view of the state, is the opportunity to compete in the playoffs. I think adding a classification gives that opportunity. I also think that, if you look at the 4A and 5A classification and then how postseason is set up right now with 24 teams, those are things that help build program success. It's a lot easier to recruit your hallways when you can say, hey, we were in the playoffs last year. It's a lot easier to look at kids and get them out for the program and increase our participation when their buddies are having fun and doing things like that. So, I think it's important that we find a way to have like programs square off, Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays, each and every week. But I also think it's really important that we find the right data to look at that and determine what that is.
One thing that I add there is, not everybody keeps up their max preps rosters really good, but I think roster size historically, can provide a pretty good trend. Might be hard for us to find, but and that kind of goes along with Adam's deal about the enrollment numbers of the school versus the program size and the program quality. Obviously you can have the same number of enrollment, but if you got 40 kids playing at one school and 160 at the other, that enrollment stuff is out the window. So, and I appreciate, Ryan's perspective on recruiting the hallways too. Playoffs are huge, man. Teams are in the playoffs. Like you said, it's easy to get kids out of the hallway to play. It's easier to get kids from the middle school to the high school to play. And then the other thing that you find in just like the equity and the parity piece of it is, if you get to play in the playoffs versus a team that doesn't, you just gain an extra week of practice, or 2 or 3. So it's almost like the rich get richer type of a deal. When you look at playoff scenarios, those more football means better football generally. So if we can level that out a little bit, or make sure that people have the opportunity to get in the playoffs at least, that's a huge thing.
Thanks, Jared.
I think and I'm looking at one division here, but I think you might be talking about 1A and 2A. Geography plays a big thing in the success or non-success and how you judge it too, because, you know, we've had teams make the playoffs that if they were somewhere else, they wouldn't have been close to the playoffs just because of where we have to play, not just considering who we have to play. And I know, you try to go out and schedule non-league games to try to equate that, but it's still geography plays and where you're placed in your league makes a big difference on success and non-success. Because our bottom level teams in our leagues wouldn't compare to the bottom level teams in some of the other leagues around the state, high or low, either way, if you look at it.
Thanks, Greg.
I'd like to tie in on what Greg said. I know I brought that up a little bit yesterday too, and I know that no one understands geography better than Adam with the distance he's had to deal with school travel. And I do agree with Greg on that. But we've always made it work with every other sport. If you're in the basketball playoffs, you're going to travel. If you're trying to go to a tournament, if I'm playing in a baseball tournament in Grand Junction, I'm going to travel from Colorado Springs. So I don't want to make too much of geography, but it will always be a problem in Colorado at the smaller school level of the travel. But I totally understand. We're trying to find the equity piece statewide 1A through 6A. If we have a 6A, the ripples that I see that we would also have to be discussing is, the playoff qualifier situation. If we're going to go with 24 out of 36 schools, that may seem a little high. It almost seems like basketball 48 out of 64, but maybe that's part of it. Non-conference scheduling, which could potentially help with this issue. But one of the challenges people have with non-conference scheduling is RPI. They're going out and they're looking for RPI benefit if they're in a weaker league versus potentially scheduling a school that may need to play down a classification. So, if RPI is weighted the same through an entire season, maybe it should be weighted higher during league season and maybe not as high, but that give Ryan Casey a headache for sure. It's just, there's a lot of issues out there, the playoff qualifiers. And what about play-ups? We also have our play-ups and our play-downs. Would we allow play-ups? Would we let a 3A size school play 5A football and then start bumping schools down who wanted to play in 6A or 6A football? So, there is a ripple to this, but hey, I'm game for anything that works well for 1A through 4A, 5A, 6A. I love the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
I did want to add, Gary, with Gary's, the fear I would have at the smaller schools is that travel that's going to occur during the season. If you drop, anytime you have a lower number of teams in a classification, you've increased travel pretty immensely. And so just to caution for that, I'm in total agreement that we need some equity. I'm in total agreement that more teams in the playoffs is better for everybody, and will build programs. But yes, just those pieces of what could happen with travel, especially if you're looking for like programs, and matching those up together in a 1 and 2 and probably 3A division. You could be going across the state often during the year.
Thanks, Frank. My 2 cents, and I shared this a little bit with you guys. I sit in a different chair now than I sat for 13 years. I sat in a chair for 13 years at a school that did the complete roller coaster of success and non-success. Whether we were 1 and 9 or whether we were 8 and 2 and league champions in 5A football. And I know what having a little bit of success does for kids. And I have sat in Danny and Marty's chair for 4 years as a 5A rep. And now this is my second or third, maybe my third year sitting in this chair as the chair of football. And so for the last 6 or 7 years, we continue to talk about the same problem. And we continue to kick the can down the road. And we attempted to put together the rebuild leagues at the 5A level. The first year, I believe, we went with all 10 schools in one league that created their own ecosystem. Had a massive negative impact on the RPI. It also didn't pass some optic tests and those kind of things. But the one thing that I want to emphasize is, and this football committee has always had this issue, if you will, is we've talked a lot today about championship weekend and about getting all of our teams at championship this and state championship that and league champion this. And I think we also have to focus a little bit of our time on those teams that struggle. And due to some weird circumstances with another school district, my school district at our district stadium, we got to host two school districts in our stadium. And so we had state champion Durango in our stadium. That I don't remember the score of that game, 56-0, 63-0, something along those lines. In a 3A game, those two teams had zero business playing each other, zero. And it wasn't just because of COVID that they ended up matched up. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Adam, those two teams were in the same league. I also watched a Regis and a Pine Creek game that went down to the last second. If I'm not mistaken, Danny, the field goal ended the game. I also watched two games of teams that were in the rebuild leagues that also were won at the very end of the game. And I'm going to tell you, the games where the teams were rebuilding and they weren't quote unquote good football, that game was just as exciting as a Regis Pine Creek game. And obviously, you know that Pine Creek has been very successful at the 4A level, and Regis is one of our top 8 teams every year in 5A. And so my feeling is, especially sitting in an athletic director's chair of a school that had the success and didn't have the success, this goes beyond football, whether we like it or not, and whether we want to admit it or not. You could have one of your less high profile sports, your lower profile sports, have an undefeated season, and there's a certain excitement about that team within your school. But if you can get your football team to where they compete every week, what does that do for the culture of your school? And football, whether we like to admit it or not, football has the ability to get people excited for more than just wins and losses on the field. There are principles out there that will tell you that if I've got some good momentum at the beginning of the year, then academically my school will do better. So for me, I'm to a point right now where and again, I don't have a vote in this matter. So I think it's time for us to put the rubber to the road. Yes, Luke, you're right. We have 1,500 point, whatever it was. We've got some options there. It hasn't worked in the past. I'm not sure how, with Fidelity, how much we've actually attacked that bylaw to help us build leagues and those kind of things. But I'm going to tell you right now that if we don't do something, rather than just kick this can down the road, we're going to start losing football in schools. It's that simple. The numbers show us that. You have a little bit of success, you might have 55 kids out for football this year. Next year, you might have 75 and you can get your feet under you. Kids want the ability to compete, not get their face kicked in and week out. I personally am a supporter of 6A. I think it starts the ball, and there's no doubt about it. We're going to be here in 2 years making adjustments off of what we put into place. But I would much rather start the process than attempt to kick the can down the road again. So that's my 2 cents.
Some concerns that I would have, and I'm kind of on the fence because I see Autumn's point with, creating 6A, maybe watering down, if you will. But, I guess the concerns, for, coming from 5A perspective is who's going to, you're going to have the top teams, kind of year in and year out that's been there. But, based on the criteria, then who's going to qualify for 6A? And where does that, obviously you're going to have a point, but then, you got to draw the line somewhere. But when you go participation enrollment, there's still going to be a huge discrepancy because, there's schools that are 3,500, 3,800 And there's only, a handful. I mean, there's, I could think of probably 4 or 5 schools that are around that 3,000 mark. So, are you going to have a 3,000 school or even 2,800 school that's really low in participation numbers for a couple of years go down and play 5A because they're not, great, but they're when you go about recruiting hallways, and I see both sides, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what criteria and who meets those criteria to be in 6A and where that cutoff is, because I think it's going to there's going to be a lot of discrepancy on the top. And I think that's going to be the biggest gap is going to be on the top. And I hear, 1A and 2A about travel. I mean, those are real necessities and real problems that we're going to have to face. But again, on 6A, it is going to be super tough to get 36 teams that are like teams with those, similar programs, because there's just not 36 teams that are going to be in the middle of the pack. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of like teams we're going to group together. Up the upper end, I don't think you're going to find it. I think there's going to be a huge gap from the top 5A to the bottom 5A team is going to be, or sorry, 6A, if we did that, would be the biggest gap there is out of all levels. 5A, 4A, I mean, I think in the middle of the pack there's going to be a lot of teams where you can do the like programs together. But in the 6A, I think there's going to be huge discrepancy.
I think when we look at this thing globally, I think our biggest problem across the state, across classifications, is that our top 8 teams in each classification and our bottom 8 teams in each classification are nowhere near each other. And that's at 42 teams right now. I think the question that we need to ask ourselves as a committee and looking at this thing globally right now is, do we have a classification problem, or do we have a how we classify problem? And how do we shrink the gap between the top 8 and the bottom 8? How do we get those like programs playing each other? Is it adding classification, or is it a reclassification? How we classify? I think both shrinks that gap significantly.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan. I think we have to look at both. 6A is not the all-encompassing answer to that, because we're always going to see consistently, you're still going to always have top teams and bottom teams in any phase of it. But again, when we shrink that number, and then we also look at how we're classifying, I think we're going to do a much better job of getting to a closer medium point.
And there's always going to be a gap. And I think we also have to be careful about setting 6A as this is the elite football division. Like, you're only good if you play 6A. I don't think we got to be careful about how that's presented too. Because there's going to be good football from 6-man through 6A, and we have to present it that way. And then that's one thing that pushes football to the forefront and, gives people confidence in it across the state and makes our state look better and grow to the forefront, like Adam's kind of 10-year plan of being a top 5 state in the country in football. Like, we got to push good football at all levels. And I think this kind of helps. It closes the gap a little bit, and then it pushes that goal forward.
I think through the years, I've heard a discussion too that another way to address this competitive equity issue is to allow for multi-class leagues. So multi-classification leagues where you have different classifications, lots of different classifications represented in a league to address that like school scenario. And the feedback that I've always heard has been fairly negative about that schools want to play within the context of the classification through their regular season. And so barring that multi-classification discussion, I think this is the best alternative to get that gap narrowed.
Sorry, I had to step away for 2 seconds, but I'm still going to focus on us trying to save programs. And I'm going to use Cheyenne Mountain as an example. Chris isn't on here, and I don't think he would mind me saying it because he said it publicly. They were in the rebuild league, the I-25 league. They were in the rebuild league of 4A. And when you start talking about putting like teams together, or like teams, like programs, somebody said, well, Chris, why didn't you just bump down to 3A? And he goes, if I go down to 3A, I'm going to get mauled. He goes, it's almost just as bad at 3A because those top tier teams in 3A, especially around us geographically. So, people continue to look at the enrollment numbers, and, we've got to get completely away from enrollment numbers, in my humble opinion. Let's go to roster numbers. Let's go to participation numbers. We have to turn that information, schools have to turn that information into CHSAA at the end of every school year anyways. In terms of our enrollment numbers, you can also pull that straight out of Planet High School, I would assume now, correct, Adam? We can get close on those numbers. So for me, it just continues to be trying to figure out a way to save programs. Because you know what, in 5A football, the current 5A football right now, if you were to pull that chunk up to 6A, your top 25% is still going to be your top 25%. Cherry Creek and Valor and Danny, that's you too, Regis. Those guys aren't going away. But if you have 25% that it's at the top and the other 75% of that classification that is competitive football, it's tough to argue that that's not good for kids. And you know what? Yeah, you might have to play one of the big dogs right off the bat. Well, that's fine. It's life's not easy, and you get to have one or two tough situations. But the ability to compete week in and week out, I think, is good. So, all right. Any other conversation?
I'll just add one piece, just in kind of framing the final conversation here. And sorry for my soapbox as an educator, but I do believe that our number one goal when we start looking at athletics and why our schools have it, as opposed to just offering club outside of the building, our number one goal is to get those kids across the stage at the end of their senior year. Anything that we can do that provides success, that keeps those kids attached to something, that keeps them coming to class and keeps their grades up so they end up with that piece of paper when they walk across the stage, that's what this is all about. And if we can do things to help programs that are struggling have kids find success and give them that motivation to continue and to have those grades and to get those things, because that's what we're all rooted in, right? That's the basis of everything we're doing, is giving that piece of paper at the very end. And anything we do that provides a positive impact to ensure that one more kid gets that piece of paper and gets across the stage, we all know the impact that piece of paper has on the positivity of that kid's life going forward, as opposed to not getting that piece of paper. And anything we can do that ensures that one more kid gets that diploma, in my mind, we're on the right track and we're keeping that focus. So that's just, even though I'm not in a building anymore, I haven't lost sight of the fact that that's what our ultimate goal is. And everything we do, we're preparing kids to get that one diploma and then the 3 E's. Are we getting them ready to be employed? Are we getting them ready to be enlisted? Or getting them ready to be enrolled? And we're focusing on that, and our decisions are to make sure that we're getting kids to that stage. For me, anything we do with that in mind, and our focus is set, is going to be a win. So, Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Wow, you actually brought education into this. Well said, Adam. Well said. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to ask if there's a motion from the floor. Whether we go down the path of 6A, if we go down the path of 6A, football committee, hear me say this loud and clear. We've got our work cut out in terms of creating leagues and some of those kind of things. Our hands are full. And if we don't go down the path of 6A and we stay where we're at in terms of five 11-mans and then the 2 6-man and 8-man, our hands are still absolutely full in terms of creating leagues. So as we get ready to vote, I just want to thank you in advance, because this is going to be a heavy lift no matter how we do it. So with that being said, is there a motion Motion on the floor, motion on the virtual screen.
I move that we add a 6A classification to football with the caveat that we are going to look at how to reallocate those divisions, not just based on numbers for school.
Okay, we have a motion from Bruce Gross to add a 6th classification. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Luke DeWolf with the second. Bruce Gross with the motion. Luke DeWolf from Steamboat with the second. Sam, roll call, please.
All right. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tonjes,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
No.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
No.
Greg Jones,
No.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Sustain. Can I do that?
I believe you can. Yes. So you're an abstention, Brian. Thank you.
Yep.
Mark Lowther,
No.
and Joe Heatley.
No.
All right, so the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. The motion carries 8 in favor, 5 opposed, and 1 abstention. So that does add a 6th classification. That tasks Adam, because you're not very busy right now with wrestling or anything, Mr.
Right.
Bright. You've been doing nothing anyways. That will task Mr. Bright, as well as myself and Ryan Casey to figure out our next steps in terms of what that looks like in terms of what work we've got ahead of us as we start to go down this road. So thank you for the open, honest discussion. That is appreciated, and I look forward to our work, not the amount of work, but I do look forward to the work that we have ahead of us. So thank you. With that, Adam, we have a 2A league proposal that was to create a rebuild league in 2A football with the passage of 6A.
Well, hey, so Chris, I have Nick who brought forward that proposal. I can let him into our Zoom meeting here. He can present his proposal.
Okay, perfect.
So let me admit Nick here with his proposal.
And how do you say his last name?
Troop, I believe. That's what I'm going with anyway. Nick,
I don't want to mispronounce a name. From my understanding, you get beat up in these meetings if you do that.
I'm
Okay,
driving
Nick.
down the highway when this meeting ends. I'll see you in an hour and a half.
Meet in the middle.
All right, Nick, I've got you logged in, so you should be good to go.
Sorry, I had multiple audio coming through my computer with the YouTube and the Zoom logging in. So with the actual passing of that 6A classification, I would just go ahead and like to remove my proposal for consideration because it was based off of wanting to look at equity within the 2A and building sort of a hope league within the 2A level.
All right. Nick, thank you. We will remove we will remove 5.0. We will remove 5.0 2A league proposal from the agenda. Nick, thanks for being with us this morning. All right, we're going to continue to boogie on down the road. We have got Adam. We are on to 6.1, the regular season in terms of common date season format. That will lead us into some postseason format discussions.
Yes. So now that we have a 6A classification, one of the hurdles that we have in front of us, if we are in favor of single site championships at some point in the future, when all the contracts align and we can look if that's something we want to do. Right now, that is a non-starter because our classifications all have different regular seasons. So we have 4A and 5A currently have 10 weeks to play 10 games, and then 24 teams get in. 3A has 11 weeks to play 10 games. 2A, 1A, 8-man, 10 weeks to play 9, 16 teams get in. So our regular seasons are not the same. And so one of the proposals would be, do we look at creating a standard regular season across all classifications, which again then allows us to begin the work of aligning our postseasons. If this were to happen, we can then align our postseasons to where everyone begins at the same time, ends at the same time, has the same number of qualifiers, and begins that work towards a common ending date and potentially looking at the single site venue for championships in the future. As of right now, that's not an option based on how our current structure is. So this would be the first step in that work. If that's something we wanted to do, it is something that we need to get this piece corrected so that when those contracts come up, we have everybody aligned at the same ending date. So it's with that in mind that we move forward, as well as just simply the equity piece that football is football and to everybody playing the same level. So my proposal within that work would be that we adopt something similar to what 4A and 5A have, with the 10 weeks to play 10 games. You can play 9. You can have your bye week in there if you so choose, but you've got 10 weeks to have your season. And if that is a 10-game season, you at the local level would make that choice to play 10. You could also make that choice to play 9, but everybody would start and end at the same time for the regular season.
And to clarify, Adam, if we don't go down, if we don't do something like this, we will not go with a format where all classifications play the state championship on the same day.
You would have to make some serious movements in your postseason qualifications and how those all align to end at the same time, because they wouldn't be starting at the same time. You would have to do some work on your postseason to have them end at the same time because they would all begin at different weeks if this were not to go through.
All right. Thank you for that. Conversation.
I do like the idea of it, everyone trying to be on the same, but just kind of like the logistics, and I'm not familiar with all the contracts and stuff like that, but it might be where that championship weekend you have 2 sites, where if we're getting Pueblo and the Broncos Stadium, or if it's CU and CSU or whatever, I think that's going to be something we need to consider. But to have a championship weekend, I think is a good thing, but just having a really good venue for those the championship games. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get, like one venue for all classifications. It might be a couple, like 2 venues or whatever, to divide that up a little bit on one weekend. So, I mean, I would agree with that. I just would, I'm just not sure how it's all going to work with trying to get, all the classifications playing in the same venue. Especially if the Broncos come through. I don't know if that's even going to be, option with we're talking about 7-8 different games or whatever. But if you had 2 different venues, I think it could be 2 good venues, nice venues. I think that'd be a viable option.
So I would caution the conversation being centered around specific venues and just the overall global concept of it's not an option right now based on what our current setup is. So this will be to change our current setup so that if that were something we wanted to explore in the future, it's actually a conversation that we can have. As of right now, it'd be a non-starter due to how we have things set up. So that's where that would be the only caution I would have is not looking venue specific at this point. Because again, we are talking 2, 3, 4 years in the future if this group were to decide that's what they even want to do. But to leave it as is, it's a non-starter for a conversation because we technically this year we won't because six man has made the move for this year only. But after this fall 21, we go back to having 3 different weekends of championship football, unless something like this and then reworking postseason is something that we are interested in doing.
I agree. I think they should all be equal. We get the questions on all, I get questions all the time, from basketball to football to why do they get more qualifiers in one division than they do the others? But I think if everybody's the same across the board, it goes along with what we just did with 6A, trying to equalize everything, and we keep along those same lines.
Excluding the venue conversation, I believe as a committee, we just discussed how, and passed unanimously how cool the single site state championship would be, or the single weekend at least. I would like to hear from, maybe the 2A, I believe you guys played 9. Is that right, Gary? I would like to know why that is the case rather than them matching up and playing 10 like everyone else.
And I'd like to throw that out is for many, many years being involved with as an AD, the smaller the school, the more you have the multi-sport athlete, and to have the potential of overlapping your fall and winter season as much as you could potentially do if we go later. I wonder if there could be a discussion of starting the week earlier versus, and I know that's an NFHS thing as well. Do we start a week earlier for everyone to fall on the same week for championship, or do the small schools have to go later, knowing that there would only be 2 six-man schools, 2 8-man schools, 2 1A, 2 2A that would be playing after Thanksgiving break. But just the fact that they start practice for winter sports the second week of November makes it challenging for those schools that have so many multi-sport athletes. So I just want to throw that out there. I love the idea of having a 10-game schedule instead of 9. I love the idea of having all the classifications play the same weekend. That sounds great to me. But we do have that small school challenge of multi-sport athletes.
So in the 10-10 as proposed, we wouldn't be adding a week to the regular season for 2A, 1A because they're currently correct me if I'm wrong, you're playing 9 games, but you have a bye week in there. And so you actually have a 10-week season. You're playing 9 games in 10 weeks. This would just afford you the opportunity to play 10 games if you so choose, but the length of your regular season would not be adjusted whatsoever from what it currently is.
Correct. And I'm really thinking postseason rather than regular season. So I'm thinking our postseason is extended by a week, which means right?
Currently we haven't discussed that yet, so it hasn't been changed yet.
Well, no, if we end up all at the same site, right? Or we would have a bye week or a week off. So no, I understand what you're saying. The regular season stays the same. We would it'd be great to have a 10th game in there.
It seems like to entertain this at a later date, entertain this conversation and give ourselves the ability, we need to go ahead and vote yes. If we want to have that ability to entertain that conversation at a later date.
And again, this would not be for this fall 21. It would be for your fall 22 and fall 23 schedules is what we're discussing.
So if I could add to Gary's and just historically anything that's changed, the small schools did that because of the overlap and because the 9-day minimum practice rule that used to be in place, even if you were rolling from one sport to another. Without that, it's probably feasible to look at small schools and say, yeah, they could go that extra week because they can roll right into practice and play, sometimes a week later in those fall or in those winter sports. So I mean, reasonably, it's probably more feasible now than it was when originally we went to those different dates. I guess they've always been that way, but it was because of 9 practice rule. And those winter sports needed those kids to get 9 practices before they could compete. So with that changing, it is feasible.
Traditionally, when do the smaller schools have their state championship game? Is it before Thanksgiving?
No, so your 2A, 1A, and 8-man has been the week before your 3A, 4A, and 5A, and then 6-man has been a week before them. So the change we made earlier is now 6-men will end the same time as 8-men, 1A, and 2A, which is the week before 3A, 4A, and 5A. So again, right now what we're talking about is just adjusting the regular season to be equal. Right now at 5A, you play 10 games in 10 weeks. But if I drop down to 3A, they play 10 games over 11 weeks. They get a bye week that they can have in there. But if I drop from 3A to 2A, they get 10 weeks to play 9 games because they get a bye week in there. So it's different based on the level. And so what we're discussing now is making the football season in Colorado 10 weeks for every classification from 6-man to 6A. Everyone has 10 weeks. They can play 10 games if they choose. They can play 9 games if they choose. That's how you would set up your schedule if you wanted to have a bye. And now the other piece to that is you could go through, if we were to make this, if we wanted to make, I would not necessarily be a proponent of it, but if we wanted to say that certain classifications aren't allowed to bye and they have to play 10 straight, like 4A and 5A will be this fall, we could have that conversation. My preference would just keep it as a 10-week season. You schedule appropriately for your team.
So that would take us to a proposal or a motion, I should say, not a proposal. Motion. Is there a motion on the floor? The virtual floor to align those weeks for the regular season. Not trying to push, but we would definitely need a motion to have a vote.
I move that we move all classifications to the 10-week cycle.
Motion by Bruce Gross. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Somebody just raise a hand real quick. Okay, Greg Jones. Sam, we're gonna go with Greg Jones. So the motion was Bruce Gross. Second was Greg Jones. Any further discussion before we go to a vote? Miss Sam, can you do a roll call for us?
All right, here we go. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tungis,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones,
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
Joe Headley.
Yes.
All right, we're back on the unanimous trail. The motion passes 14 to 0. All right, we are at 11:03-ish. Do we need to have a break or do we need to keep plowing? I would think that we potentially could be done in the next 45 minutes to an hour. We need to take a quick 5-10 minute break or keep plowing. Adam?
We can do a show of hands, I guess, on the screen. How many people would prefer? I don't need a break, but that's just me personally. I got enough coffee here. I'm still ready to go.
How many would like a break or just keep moving? Break? Jared, you guys want a 5-minute break? Let's do a quick 5-minute break.
Okay, 11:10.
11:10. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. And I got all mad. He's like, you didn't say hi. I'm like, I was assuming that if you left it at the front desk, you were busy. And he was like, no. And I was like, well, we should have just left it with you. I got it from you.
Adam, did you let Bruce Gross back in? He had to change devices.
I did.
He did. Yeah. I'm back on.
Gary, that light underneath your chin, that is sweet. That's like the movies, bro. No, put it back on. It's like the movies. Attaboy. Looking good. All right, you guys, we're about 11:10. If we could, let's jump back on. All right, so, well, I'm going to let cameras pop a couple more minutes first, Adam. All right. All right. Looks like we have just a couple more. Bruce, you're going to fly with your camera off, correct, Mr. Gross?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Autumn back on. I'm going to go ahead and get us rolling, Adam, if that's okay with you. Yep. So we are appreciate you guys' work so far this morning. Want to try to semi-push us. I think we can probably be done by noon. So just for the record, I'm not sure if football meeting's ever been done by noon. So Sam, if you could make sure that you put that in the record, that would be awesome as well. Postseason 7.0. Here we go. 7.1. A discussion regarding all classes using the same postseason format. If we are going to, and Adam, I'm going to throw it to you, but if we're going to go to a sixth classification and we're looking at 36 in each classification, I think the discussion surrounds to do what 4A and 5A are doing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bright, where we are looking at 24 qualifiers, teams 1 through 8 having that bye the first weekend, and then 9 through 24 playing. The winners coming out, and then us being at 16 and playing it the rest of the way through. Is that correct, Adam?
Yeah. So yes, what I think we should do first is 7.1. Let's just have the discussion around all classes using the same format. Once we have, if that's something that we bring to a vote and that is something that moves forward, now the work is to figure out what that format is. I think discussing format before we've discussed if we are all on the same page, we want to use the same format, we've got the cart before the horse a little bit. So I would say just procedurally, let's discuss if we like the idea of all using the same format, which would fall in line with what we just approved for everybody having the same regular season. Do we want to approve and discuss everyone using the same postseason format? And then the work begins on what does that format look like. That would be my suggestion to you, Mr. Knoll.
Finally, you're showing me a little bit of respect for the first time.
I almost threw it in my mouth.
You're on YouTube right now, pal. YouTube sensation. Okay, so what is on the floor for us to discuss, you guys, is are we looking at all classifications using the same format for playoffs? We're not talking about what the format is. Do we all want to be on the same page in terms of format? So right now, and if we need to go through what we're doing, in each classification, we can do that real quick, or we can just run with it. So
I would just like to know how this looks. I just don't know for 6 and 8 man. I mean, we're all talking, the 6 classifications. So
good question, Greg.
So right now, 6-man and 8-man look the same as what you would at 1A with the 16 teams getting in. So that's no different. Our only place where we have changes is when we get to 4A and 5A. Currently, they use a model where 24 teams get in. The top 8 receive a bye in round 1. Then in round 2, they're on to the it looks the same as everybody else. They've got a 16 team bracket at that point. But they qualify 24, 1 through 8 have a bye, 9 through 24 play round 1, and then you're on to the 16-man. So that's what their system looks like currently. Everything besides 4A and 5A looks the same with the 16 teams.
No, my question was what the guys on the committee think about going forward by putting 24 on there.
I think if we did 6A, we go down to 16 teams. That would be what I would push for. I think it gets pretty watered down if you have 36 teams and 24 out of 36 make it in. But are we talking when format just like even qualification, like RPI, coaches poll, all that stuff? We'd do it.
No, that's already set. So that would stay the same. We're just talking. Do we want to have really the question now is in the most simplistic form? Do we want to have the same number of qualifiers in 6-man through 6A? And if that's where we move forward with, then we get to dive into the deeper questions of what does that look like?
Well, what benefit is there, or I guess what are the pros and cons of having it the same or not having it the same?
So one of the discussion points in creating our regular season to look the same was that if we ever wanted to have the conversation of single weekend championships, now that the regular season looks the same, if that is still a goal, then the postseason has to look the same as well if we want to end at the same time.
I kind of want to echo what Danny said. I don't want to assume that there's going to be a 6A because we're already about, split within our group here. That's quite a discussion to have. And when we're going from a 50%, half of the classification already makes the playoffs. And then if we're going to look at extending that into a 6A, now you're going to 66% of each classification is going to make the postseason. So
what's the percentage?
That there's a 6A, but
what's the percentage for basketball?
Is basketball
48 out of 64-ish?
Yeah, somewhere around there. So it's about the same.
I'm just going to share this with you guys. And Adam, I think we're off track because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we're just talking format. We're not talking about how many, we're talking format, correct?
Correct.
Dude, I was trying to go a whole meeting without getting off track. So let's get back to that and then we can talk about numbers.
I think format, we should all be the same. Just, I don't get any questions that way. Why do they get more qualifiers than we get if we all have the same amount of teams in there? It just equalizes everything out for me.
Good point. Thank you, Greg.
It also would make, again, I don't want to talk format, but makes it a lot easier to get the same common weekend. if we're all on the same page with that. So because right now 4 and 5A, we with 24 teams, we add a whole week, and I don't know if that's fair for multiple sport athletes. So if we all did common, I think that makes it easier, and for multiple sport athletes.
Thanks, Danny. Other discussion? I need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we all use the same format in state for the state playoffs.
I'll second that.
Is that you, Marty?
No, that's me, Danny.
Okay, sorry. So we've got the motion from Greg and we've got the second from Danny. Thank you, gentlemen. Samantha, roll it.
Got it. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tonjes,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Brian Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Frank had to leave, so he is not voting.
got it. Greg Jones,
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
Joe Headley.
Yes.
Fantastic. The motion passes 13-0. Now comes the lift. What is that format? And so 7.2 is the format. I believe Adam is proposing, or at least wants to discuss, the 24 qualifiers, top 8 receive buys. So in essence, Adam, we can safely say, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're ballpark 36 per classification. We might have one classification that has to roll to 38 or 40, depending on where we're at. But just general, can we assume 36, Adam?
Yes, for discussions, for the point of discussion, we will say we have 6 classifications of 36 in 11-man football. 6-man and 8-man reside roughly close to those numbers as well. Again, 6-man, their numbers fluctuate from year to year based on some of our smallest schools in the state, finding out how many boys have actually enrolled in school that August. So we have some of those teams that don't know until August rolls around if they actually have enough bodies in the building to have a team.
All right, so that's the assumption, and what Adam is, and myself, I'm not gonna, Adam and I, we're gonna put on the table to start the discussion. Do we go 24 qualifiers with the top 8 getting buys the first round, very similar to what 4A and 5A are doing right now? They get a bye, they get that week off, and then we run 16, 8, 4, 2 after that. So discussion.
All right, so I know the numbers have changed a little bit. We're looking at that 36 versus in 6 classifications and or in 8 classifications. But 4A and 5A have done the 24 teams. I think there was some success in that. I think teams generally like that. I do know that last year there was also a proposal a discussion from 2A to look at that same thing. So obviously there was some interest there. I think one of the things that we've talked about is staying the same. And I think one of the things we've talked about is how we make things more equitable, how we create more enthusiasm, how we create more participation. I think that was a point that we hit on earlier with, the importance and the opportunities that you create within your program by having the opportunity to participate in playoffs. And I think this falls into that same type of discussion.
I agree with Ryan. I think it's just gives more teams a chance to have that one more week of practice and just be able to claim that success.
In 6-man, looking at the historical RPA data from 2018, 2019, we'd be looking, if we went to a 24 team bracket, we'd be looking at 9 teams with losing records in the playoffs. In 2018, we'd be looking at 8 teams with losing records in the playoffs. In 6-man at 24-9 game might as well be a 124 game in 6-man football. Our 24 is going to get killed by our 9 times out of 10.
Thanks
What's
for that, Joe.
What's the score in your 16 versus 1 games?
Our 16 versus 1 games are very similar to the blowout games in that one, but it's usually only maybe 1 or 2 games in that stretch with the current 16 teams.
Does giving 24 an extra week of practice
That's
narrow that gap from year to year?
That's the only thing that that we would probably like, is that extra week of practice. With 6-man, I looked at a team that last year in 2009, they'd won 1 game. We realigned them this year, and they won 4 games out of 6. And if they would have won 1 more game, they would have been actually a top 10 or probably a top 6 seed in 6-man. And that's just change in 1 year. The change for 6-man in 1 year, it could be 1 kid that just makes so much difference, whether it's to graduation or having a freshman come in. That's just incredible.
But I think we can also resolve some of the 6-man issues and how we look at building leagues if we're using the 4 years worth of data. I know let me make sure you hear me. I know travel is an issue in 6-man to a certain extent, but I know that we also can look at how we build our leagues to see if there's a way that we can ensure, just like we've talked about the whole morning, ensure there's as much equity as possible, but not sacrificing a 400-mile bus trip for the sake of equity also. I clearly understand that as well.
Yeah, it's just that, even in 2019, there was 2 teams that qualified in the top 16 with losing records. In 2018, there were 3 that qualified with losing records. And it's just maybe the league they're playing in could be a possibility of that. But I'm all in favor of the more kids that participate in the state playoffs. I'm all for that. It's just if we, to a certain point, if going to 6 classifications waters it down quite a bit. Because we're actually, if we looked at the numbers, we'd be somewhat similar with that other classification, putting another 16 teams in there, where we are with the number of teams that are qualifying now. It'd be a similar number.
Yeah, so if I'm doing my math right now, if 4A and 5A both had 24 and everybody else had 16, that's 128 teams getting in the playoffs. If we went to 6A and had 16 teams get in, we'd be the exact same, 128 teams getting in. We went to 24 teams, that's 192 teams getting in across the state.
My question is, not to sound like that guy, but my question is, if we go, in terms of creating excitement and those kind of things, if we go 16 at the 6A level, I'm just talking 6A, basically 8, we're battling for 8 spots, right? Because we've talked about that the top 8 are always going to be there. We talked about, what it does for a program when you make the playoffs. And you know what? All right, this year our goal is to make the playoffs. Next year it's going to be to try to get to the second round or get that playoff win. If we go to 16 in that top classification, I don't want to focus too much on 6A, but on that top classification, we know that the top 7 or 8 are always going to be there. Just a question.
I'm going to tie into Sullivan's math. John, I'm going to let you do the math, and Ryan Casey. Isn't it true that the 4A, 5A 24 team had to start week 10? Do we throw an extra week in there or force a bye week if we only go 16? Does that force a bye week for everybody before the playoffs start? Can someone help me out with that math?
There would not be a need for a bye week.
If everyone went 24.
No, if we're at 16s, there's no need for that.
Correct.
That bye week.
Correct. If we're at 16. If
So
we're
does that
24, if we're 24, did we add a week to the season?
Yes.
Yes. So that would make your If you go to 24, that would have it have an impact on 2A, 1A, 6-man, and 8-man. They would be ending the same time as 3A, 4A, 5A currently do. So we've added a week to the postseason for 2A and below. In the going to the 24 number, that adds a week to the postseason. So in theory, you've got 2 teams that are impacted greater than they currently are per classification, 2A, 1A, 8-man, 6-man.
I think going with a 6A, and again, just if the number's about the same, where same teams are making it with a 6A, I think 16 team format, and not having an extra week in there, different reasons, but I mean, not watering it down, having multiple sport athletes. I know it's only a few teams, but it does matter at a lot of places. I know we have a lot of multiple sport athletes, and I know the 1A, 2A, 3A, there's a lot of multiple sport athletes. So for me, I would be all in favor of 16 teams, not 24.
So John, just to clarify, you must have been a math teacher. Were you a math teacher?
Physics.
Even better. You're smarter than a math teacher. Just to clarify, you're saying that if we had 6 classifications, 16 team playoffs, we do not add another playoff qualifier to what our current plan is.
If our current plan has 2 classifications with 24 teams and 5 that would have 16, so that includes 6-man, 8-man, all the way up through 3A, it's 128 schools get in, and then 8 classifications with 16 teams getting in would leave us at 128 as well.
So we haven't created any other opportunities in that situation by staying at 16. But we do create several opportunities to help grow our sport, grow our programs, grow our classifications, so narrow the gap between top and bottom if we go to 24.
I think the one thing that I also want to put out there's a reason that 5A and 4A are at 24. And for those of you that have been on this committee for a bit, you remember how big of push we heard from 5A and 4A to get to more qualifiers, that 16 was not the right number. And so that's the one thing that I want to put on the table is I personally feel like we would be going backwards if we went away from 24. If we went away from 24, I think we would be going backwards. And Ryan, Casey, you can help me too if I'm misspeaking. The massive push from 4A, 5A over the years is get away from 16 and add the qualifiers. We started at 32 for 5A. And remember, we called them the toilet bowls when one played 32 and then you had those other 10 teams and whatever else. That was a disaster. And everybody said 32 is too many. Then we went to 16 and they said, that's not the right number because 12 through 22, 23, those teams are all the same. And that's how we settled. And that's how we landed on 24. And so what concerns me is if we talk about going backwards for those 2 classifications, and again, don't have a vote in it. If we talk about going backwards, I'm concerned that we're going to hear from those top, probably 4A, 5A, 6A, that we don't have enough qualifiers. That's my concern.
You're right on that, Chris. And I do want to say you might get pushback from some of those schools that say, heck no, we're not going to be 6A because we're never going to have a chance to make the postseason. Same thing as you were going to have with 4A schools going 5A, 2A going 3A, 1A going 2A. Heck no, we're not going to go compete with those teams. We never have a chance to make the postseason. Now, there's a couple factors there, right? They're not going to understand what the new 1A or the new 2A is going to look like because you are moving a series of teams up the ladder. 1A is going to look entirely different. And I actually think what you guys did with 6A is going to greatly impact in a good way the smaller classifications. Everyone's talking 5A, 4A, but it's really going to alleviate some of the pressure at the top of those smaller classifications. But you're correct about the history there, Chris. It was about those teams that are typically 12 to 20 are very similar programs. Now that said, I do understand, both sides of this argument in terms of 24 out of 36. And if you guys are purely talking about what's going to have the best chance of 6A passing legislative council, I do think that there is some merit to 24 out of 36 might be too many. So not really adding much here, just giving you both sides, but you're correct there about the history.
And my phone's been blowing up since this conversation started that if you go 16, you're going to lose some programs because of that whole, I'm never going to make the playoff conversation. So that's just 2 cents. Keep chatting. Chatty Cathy's.
The previous configuration, what was the percentage of schools that made the playoffs? Does anybody know that?
24 out of
in 4A, in 4A, 5A?
24 out of 42-ish.
John, do you know what that is? What percentage is that?
57%.
57?
24 out of 42 is 57.
That's what I would guess.
And then in the new proposed model with only 36 teams, 24 going, what's that?
75.
Mirror basketball, it'd be 75%.
Oh, it's 66. 4 out of 30.
That's what I thought.
2/3.
Yeah.
So 57 to 66.
More opportunity, man.
And if you want to break it down further, what you're looking at is you're giving 64 more schools across the state of Colorado the opportunity to experience postseason than what currently have the opportunity to reach.
And I can't speak, Joe, for 6-man or even Brian for 8-man, but if adding a classification is going to help us balance the equity piece, that 9-24 game becomes closer. That's a closer ball game if we balance the classifications like we're talking about.
And just for some more perspective, basketball going to their 6A model that they're proposing to be voted on at Legislative Council, they're looking at it 48 out of 60 schools making the postseason.
Playoffs are fun. I don't care what level you're at.
Here's in just kind of our conversations when we got started with this, here's the example that I used. There's a reason that college teams go to the Cheez-It Bowl or the nobody's ever heard of it bowl in Alabama somewhere. It's not because they want to get that big shiny trophy that's the box of Cheez-Its to put in their trophy case. It's because they want the experience, they want the extra practice, they want to have a positive vibe going into the off season, and it gives them a chance for recruiting. Now, recruiting obviously is a taboo word for us to use, right? But it still remains intact because it gives those programs the opportunity to recruit their hallways more because they've seen success and gotten the postseason. They got an extra week of practice. That's seniors all the way down to freshmen. They got an extra week of practice. They got better. It's momentum to go in the off season. It's a way to help our programs that are in that 24 range. Odds of them beating a 9, probably not as high as they would like, but it's also momentum so that next year, maybe that carries over where they're a 16 to 18. And now they've got a winnable game because they're building their program. And we're giving those guys opportunities to build their programs, to see success and to get more kids interested in playing. And so that kind of, for me, it goes back to what we talked about originally of how do we grow the sport and how do we push us further along. I think this is one way that we can do that. I'm not saying it's the perfect answer and it's the end all be all cure all, but I do think it's something that can help us if that's something that we want to do.
I think as far as 8-man is concerned, I've served on the seating committee and for several years. There are a lot of good teams that have been left off in the format before with the 16 teams that definitely could have qualified and been well represented into the playoffs. I don't know whether there's 24, but certainly in the past, there's been 3 or 4 to 5 teams there that have been very good football teams that have been left out of the playoffs. So I think for 8-man, it would be a good thing.
The only thing I would throw in is just from the Western Slope perspective is just that if we do go 24 teams, I think it's the same concerns that a lot of our schools have for basketball, that first round game is just can be a huge amount of travel. I get that there's an extra week of practice, but to go somewhere, travel a huge amount of distance, miss a lot of school, which I guess gets back to the educational component, miss a ton of school to go get destroyed by another team sometimes isn't necessarily the best way to end your season or to build a program. So I think you can make that other side of the argument a little bit too, but I understand the positives also.
Adam, can you tell me, if we do not go 24, would we have to move the state championship up to the Saturday after Thanksgiving, or would we have to do a bye, or everyone takes a week off before the playoffs start? What's your thought process on that?
No, we wouldn't introduce buys. We would just move up our championship date for where 3A, 4A, 5A plays. We would move that up. It'd be a more condensed season.
Great discussion. Great discussion. Any more discussion? Need a motion?
I'm just going to throw out real quick. If we're talking about kids, right? Kids want those experiences and kids want to be part of something. Bottom line, you know what? Win or lose, it's another week with their buddies, with their coaches, with people that matter in their lives. And if it's what's best for kids, then we should create opportunities for kids.
Yeah. And ask
And
them
that,
right
that 24 seed is more easy to attain than a 16 seed for those teams that really need some help with a carrot to get in the playoffs. It's attainable for some places.
Is it possible to look at something other than 16 or 24? If we looked at 20 teams, that would be 12 teams with a bye in the first round instead of 8. And then so basically there'd be 1, 2, 4 kind of play-in type games. Just another option that is more than 16 but less than 24.
Like a wild card weekend.
Is that a
Super
wild card weekend or a super wild card weekend?
I guess the biggest issue with that is it gives a lot of teams, it gives 12 teams a bye that week. So.
Okay. I don't want to squelch us, but are we to a point where there's a motion?
I move to create 24-team playoff system from 6-man to 6A.
And I will second that.
Jared Hinton with the first, Marty Tonjes with the second. Discussion to ensure. Samantha, roll it.
All right, here we go. Danny Philman,
No.
Marty Tonjes,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
No.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Still gone.
got it. Greg Jones,
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
and Joe Healy.
No.
All right. Motion carries 10 yeses, 3 nos. So our playoff structure is exactly the same for 6-man through 8-man. 24 teams qualify, 1 through 8 have a bye, 9 through 24 play the first weekend with the bracket playing out. Thank you for yet more great discussion, you guys. I seriously appreciate it. Let's talk about something that we talk about at every football committee meeting, because we hear it every year. Largest classification, high seed hosts all rounds. We're going back to who hosts in terms of higher seed hosting and alternating and all that good stuff. So, Mr. Bright, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. I need to step away for 2-3 minutes and I'll be right back. Mr. Bright, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Okay. So this conversation just revolves around what we voted on last year and passed. 5A was the only classification that had the high seed host throughout. So this would carry forward. 5A is now 6A, so therefore it's listed as the highest classification. Is the highest classification still interested in the high seed hosting all the way through? We also can have the discussion if that's something we want to do all the way throughout. But right now, as is, the highest classification, which has been 5A, has hosted at the high seed. Is that something we are interested in doing for all classifications and or just keeping at the now 6A level? One of the reasons that it works at that high classification is you have a geographic component in that classification that doesn't exist in other classifications. You can begin to look at your 6A schools are all on the I-25 corridor from essentially the southern side of Colorado Springs to the Fort Collins-ish type area, all manageable travel as opposed to going from this year with our COVID season. That is not mandating that a Dove Creek have to travel to Julesburg and get to see every part of the state on their trip. So I do see it as being something that's manageable at that higher classification due to geography. But that's why it's on there, because that currently exists. And do we want to keep that, remove that, or adjust that to others?
I don't like it just because of geography, and you pull an upset and you're still having to travel again the next weekend. Our 1A, you're same as everybody else. You're in the four corners of the state, so travel just makes it awful, and it just doesn't help it out.
I think this could be by classification, just because I agree 1A, 2A, the guys that got to travel a lot doesn't make sense, but it makes sense for like 6A would make sense for, but and 5A maybe so as well. Just depends on that. But for the smaller schools that are traveling a ton, might not make sense. So I would think it would be better just to do by classification if you're high seed.
Has there ever been a neutral site component to it at the smaller levels? I mean, that kind of goes off of what you're saying there with by classification, but I mean, neutral site at the smaller levels way easier for travel and no home field advantage for one or the other, I guess. But
I can say in my 8 years here in Colorado, neutral site's not something I see very often. I know where I came from, that was kind of the norm for playoffs. My personal opinion is I don't think I would ever mandate it to become neutral site. I do think it's something that our schools may need to give more thought to as we move forward, as conditions change, as our budgets change over the next few years, and everybody really begins to feel the impact of what we've been living through the last 9 or 10 months. Those are things that are just going to be made at the school level. But I think those are decisions that are going to have to be really thought out well between the two teams that are participating against each other, and what does that look like? And then secondly, schools that are able to host, what does that look like? And as far as if you're the neutral site location, what does that look like? And the willingness to open your facility up for two teams to use it, and those things. I think those are things that are going to be conversations that are going to be had more often than they have been in the past as we move forward, I believe.
Would that affect our the current tournament playoff finance structure?
It's in it. There is some verbiage in there if you're playing a neutral site. We would still have somebody that's designated as the home team. So with our current structure, as far as number of home games that we've had and those things, there would still be a team that is listed as the home team even at a neutral site. So we would follow that same structure. But is there a willingness to split the cost more evenly and meet in the middle, as opposed to having a one corner to the other corner type of travel. Is that something we want to? I don't think it's something we dictate, but I think it's something that's a conversation piece that needs to be out there.
So where are we at, Mr. Bright?
We need to, so I guess we need to have a proposal, and is our proposal that we want to maintain where the highest classification still has the highest seed host and does not impact the other classifications. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, so are we talking?
Do we even have to have a motion if we're not changing anything?
Technically, the verbiage says 5A. So now that we have a 6A, we would need to make a motion that 6A have high seed host throughout playoffs until a neutral site finals.
And the question is, does it make sense for 5A as well? And right, 6A, it's the I-20, well, the old 5A is the I-25 corridor, Fort Collins to Colorado Springs, a little bit Western Slope, depending on how their numbers fall each year. But do we need to look at 6A and 5A or just 6A at this point in time? Not knowing who's going to be in what classification. Or Adam, is this something that after we do leagues, we can put back on the table once we do leagues to see if it makes sense for 5A, 4A?
I think this could be something that could be a league proposal that comes to legislative council if we have those set up and the schools that are in 5A decide they wanted to adopt that and add that classification. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how I would go about that process, is having that come forward as a league proposal to legislative council if those groups decided to do that.
So they would amend it from, I guess not from the floor, from the virtual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there will be another football committee meeting where this can be discussed prior to a 6A classification, when things are already rolled out.
Yes, because we're not talking next fall, so that could be discussed at the next meeting, which would be next December.
Yes.
Are we looking at all classifications here? Because I'm thinking 3, I mean, we kind of discussed a little bit about looking at by classification, 3A as well, 3A, 4A, 5A. I'm not sure 2A, it makes sense with the geography, I think is what they were saying, but I would say maybe looking at 3A as well.
Okay, so the question that I have for the committee is, do we leave as is and make sure this is on the agenda for next year? Once we, and quite frankly, that'd give every classification an opportunity to figure out what they want to do on it. Thoughts on that?
Table it.
Jared, you're saying table it?
Yes.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree, table it.
So since it's not an official vote, give me thumbs up. Are you guys good with tabling this?
So I think you technically should ask for a motion and have the motion die on the floor.
Okay, perfect. Do we have a motion on the floor to talk about largest classification, higher seed host for all rounds? Is there a motion? Not seeing a motion. This dies on the floor and we are moving forward. So 7.4 talks to us about neutral site finals, top 2 seeds guaranteed to host in the semifinals, all classifications if they're still playing. So this is similar, Adam.
So what we're looking at here is, and Ryan Goddard, I'm going to throw it to you here in a second too. What we're looking at is if you earn the 1 or 2 seed and the championship site is going to be at a neutral site, should we guarantee those that have earned the 1 and 2 seed the right to host semifinal games at home and not have to lose the semifinal home field advantage because of upsets on the bracket prior to that game? The way it stands now, in theory, you have earned that right to have the semifinal game, but if an upset happens somewhere along the bracket, you now go on the road as a top 2 seed. Do we want to fix that? That says no matter what upsets occur, if the 1 or 2 seed is still in, the highest seed would host that semifinal game if the championship game were at a neutral site.
And I guess what I will add to that, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be top 2 seeds, but I think it could be higher seed. And just the fact that, when I understand why it's not just high seed. I mean, it's a financial burden to a lot of schools that pull an upset and continue to have to travel. I mean, I think that's the biggest reason for, why we alternate, why it's fewest home games, and then goes to higher seed if home games are equal. My point in this is that there are situations, in the past where when there wasn't a neutral site state championship, there was the opportunity to earn a state championship, a home game for a state championship as the higher seed. Now that opportunity is not there with neutral site state championships, but I also believe that may have put the higher seed team that has earned that right to host, in a lot of people's opinions, in the most important game of the year at that time, or their last game of the year. It's taken that opportunity away. So I guess my thought about it is we shouldn't have a top 4 seed traveling for the semifinals without the opportunity to host the following week, with those all being neutral site state championships. So this would, the discussion, I guess, would be around, should high seed or higher seed host in the semifinals with neutral site state championships?
Wouldn't that all equal out to be the same as what we just tabled? Because you could host the first round, both like teams win, both seeded teams win. You win, you're the higher seeded team there, so you get a host again because of the way we break it down, and then you're automatically guaranteed to host in the semifinals. So your highest seed's hosting all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, it could work out that way, but it also could work out that where the higher seed is still traveling in the semifinals. It's all going to depend on the bracket. And there's been situations the past couple of years where, you have a 2 seed traveling, to go play a 7 seed. You have a 1 seed going to travel to play a 4 seed. However it works out. But, I mean, it's just, I guess it's the opportunity that, as a high seed, without a opportunity to host a state championship, that they should at least have the opportunity to host the next most important game of the year.
With the 2014 bracket, the 8 teams that get a bye would be hosting first round, because
hosting the second round.
Well, hosting their first round, the bracket second round, because they're the higher seed with the least amount of home games. That'd be correct with the current format that we have.
They would host the second round, yes.
Yeah, the second round bracket game.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what.
I think Adam, sorry to jump in, I think Adam actually had that written into the bulletin, that they host those second round games no matter what. Is that correct, Adam?
Correct. Yeah, 1 through 8 would host the second round. So what this is talking about is when you get down to the final 4, because if you've got 1 through 8 are playing, if there's any upset in that round, so if 1 through 8 were to lose in that, that's where you're gaining the potential to have your top seeds not host because there was an upset. And if there was, so that's what we're talking about, is that second round after we're down to the field of 16 or even the field of 8, when you're having upsets there, that's when you would be potentially looking at 1, 2, or 1 through 4, if you want to call it, having the potential to not host a semifinal.
It's essentially when the bracket doesn't go chalk.
I think there's got to be some reward for those top seed teams. I think that's why higher seed makes sense in some divisions, but especially with a semifinal. I mean, if you're a 1 or 2 seed, and you should be able to have that, at least that semifinal home game. I'm not sure how it plays with, the lower, like the 1 and 2As travel wise, but I'm sure everyone would love to host that semifinal game, especially if you're the 1 or 2 seed. So I would absolutely agree with it, but I'm all in favor of higher seed hosting, but I understand there's a lot of travel issues with the lower levels too, or the 1, 2, and 3A.
Because if I'm a seed 17 through 24, who went on the road in that initial round, if I were to win that game, I'm going to go play it 1 through 8. If I were to beat a 1 through 8 seed, I would get the home game at that point because I haven't had a home game yet. It would then be if I won that game again and I'm playing a seed in a semifinal, that's really kind of the conversation we're talking about at that point is if somebody at that level was to go through and it aligned right, do we want to give our top seeds the opportunity to say they've got the home game in that round with the added rounds that are there previously? I guess the simplest way to put it, do we reward an upset somewhere on the bracket to the upset team and take away the home field advantage from the team that earned the high seed?
This seems to me goes hand in hand with the higher seed discussion. So, I think it's got to be by classification.
And I think this is still excluding the 5A classification because that is a separate classification. So this would be the other neutral site state championships. And I mean, I said it would include 5A at that point, I guess, as they're still 5A or higher seed throughout.
Is this something that we would have time to take back to our classifications before we vote on it, or before it actually goes into effect? Because we'll have another, if the calendar stays the same, we'll have another committee meeting in December of 21 also. Is that correct?
Correct. What we're discussing right now would be for the next cycle. So this would not play into effect for this 2021 fall. This would be for fall 22. So this is something that can be a discussion item to take out and come back next December and see if this is where we want to go. That would be an option. If there's a motion that is made and it doesn't go anywhere, that would be what we could do.
Okay. So further discussion, or I'll ask for a motion. I'll ask for a motion on 7.4 neutral top 2 seeds guaranteed host.
I'll make a motion that says higher seed host with neutral site state finals. Higher seed host semifinals with neutral site state finals.
Okay.
I'll second it.
We've got a motion by Ryan Goddard and seconded by John Sullivan. Discussion. Miss Samantha, can you call a roll?
Give me just 2 seconds, please.
Chris, may I make a comment before she does?
Please do.
Discussion?
Yes, sir.
I'm playing the side of we're trying to get more teams into the playoffs. Knowing that we have some really strong programs that perennially are going to be top 4, top 6. The opportunity to host a playoff game is one of the biggest thrills of a school's program. And so, though I totally understand the idea if you earn the top seed, we're going to have potentially, there could be a 5 or a 6 that has a chance to host a 2 or a 1 or a 3. And it could be one of the greatest experiences of their school's history. I just want to throw that out there as part of the discussion that we're trying to give everybody opportunity. Just, that's it.
Thanks, Gary.
All right.
All right. Any other discussion before Samantha rolls it? It's all you, Sam.
All right, here we go. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tonjes,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Sorry, no.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones,
No.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
No.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
and Joe Heedley.
No.
Okay. So the motion carries 10 votes to 4. So that motion does carry. Thank you for that. Boogieing right along. The discussion item 7.5 is not adjusting brackets or seeds to eliminate first round matchup. As you guys know, right now we have it where the 4 data points will start our discussions, and we will build a bracket off of that 4 data points, at which point in time we then look at it. And if we have 2 teams from the same league, we will adjust. Usually, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bright, we adjust the lower seeded team up or down 1 spot to avoid league matchups in the first round. Correct, sir?
One spot is the key. They can be adjusted 1 spot, and it cannot create, and that adjustment cannot create another conflict on the other side of the bracket by making that adjustment.
And we usually adjust the lower seeded team, not the higher seeded team.
Correct.
Okay. So the discussion is not doing that anymore, and what is on the table, and I'll let you sort of take it and run with it, Danny, because I believe this is coming from you, that we basically say the 4 data points set the bracket. We're done. Play football. So Danny, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Yeah, I just think with 4 data points, you let them fall where they may. I mean, you got we're collecting 4 different ways to seed teams. Let the chips fall where they may, and that's who you play instead of having a human element where you move people up and down. Your seed is your seed. You need to go with it. And I know that there might be some matchups, league matchups. Well, you know what? Well, that's who you should match up. You want to create fair and equal games. Then, if you're the 2 seed and playing the 7 seed, whatever, or sorry, 2 playing 15, whatever it is. But I just don't like the human element moving around a little bit. It's just I think your seed should be your seed, and where you earn that spot and where the data points put you at, that's where you need to play. And again, take the human element out and use the data points what they're designed for.
Right.
Danny, the one thing I will add to that is that also in that bracket in the postseason format is the ability, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but head-to-head when they're touching, right? They're back-to-back, say they're at 8-9. If they have if 9 has a head-to-head win over 8, they still can get flipped in that situation, correct? Ryan Casey?
Say that one more time, Ryan. You're talking, say it again.
So I believe when the 4 data points first came out, when we set that whole thing up, if there was a head-to-head matchup where 9 beat 8, or the 2 seeds were back-to-back, take whatever numbers you want, the head-to-head would take over the 4 data point seed.
That's exactly correct. Yes.
That's correct?
Yep.
So then we are that would be my only thing, is that if a 9 beat an 8, and we have a league conflict or whatever, but then, you have the head-to-head win of a 9 versus 8, then we can adjust that in a head-to-head, in a human element that matters, whereas on the field, that would be my only concern.
To further clarify that, I think we said touching on the seed line, so you couldn't move a 9 above a 7, but if it was a 8-9 or a 9-10, you could flip those.
You're correct.
We already have the human element by the coaches poll, so I think we've all been in a lot of seeding committees. The opportunity to make that switch, if necessary, I've seen some of it seems like just common sense. But yeah, going straight, I understand that, just going straight off of it, but we do have a coaches poll human element already.
Is geography a current consideration in moving teams at all?
I don't believe it is. Adam, I'm correct. And Ryan, correct? It is not. Once it's the 4 data points and we roll, I mean, taking that head to head and the league
And
matchup.
league matchup
Geography's
exception.
not, correct?
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say my brain is jumbled from COVID football and other sports committees. I don't remember. I do feel like it was a factor of this, like 15, 16. I feel like we could have taken that into account. I feel like people would be pretty upset if we didn't take geography into account in a situation like that.
So I'm trying to think back to the last seeding meeting for football that was pre-COVID, and I don't remember making geographic changes for those that were using the 4 data points. I know that 6-man and 8-man were not using the 4 data points at that time, so they did use geographic concerns in those 2 brackets at that time. But I believe
that's what I was thinking of, Adam.
The 1A through 5A bracket was a pretty simplistic meeting in that the seeding was already there. We looked for league matchups and moved forward with it.
And I think maybe the geography piece came into play when we were looking at leagues. I think we did that at the same meeting, Ryan. So I think once we went to the 4 set of data points, it went on the bracket and it was league matchups that were avoided in the first round and looked for the seed line head-to-head winner.
I think, Ryan, I believe you're 100% correct. Okay.
If we go to 6A and we have 24 teams in the playoffs out of 36, don't we have a greater opportunity to have league matchups? And to me, it would make more sense to give us the ability to be able to move around with more teams in the playoffs. I understand if it were 8, but it seems to make sense to be able to adjust if need be.
That possibility, that percentage of chance is going to definitely go up, John.
I think you're going to go way up in your percentage because you have so many. So again, your seed is your seed, and it takes out that human element. And I mean, you're going to have league matchups. You're going to be moving, more people, especially 24 out of 36 making it. I think you're going to have to move more than the probability is a lot more to move people. So again, I think whatever your seed you are, it eliminates. Hey, if you have to play your conference opponent again, hey, so be it. But with again 24 making it, you're going to have a lot more chances of people moving around, and it just kind of takes out any questions. Hey, you were seeded number 17. That's where you're at.
So the 2019 bulletin had 3 bullet points that kind of pseudo address this. So first was, if the scenario exists where 3 or more consecutive seeded teams have all played one another, they will remain as originally placed on the bracket. And then technically we just have 2 bullets that address it. The next bullet would be, when possible, conference opponents will not be paired against one another in the first round, and geography will be a consideration in the first round. These adjustments can be made for seeds number 9 through 16. So that was what was written in the bulletin the last time we played football without COVID.
And Danny, I agree. I mean, I think, the conference opponent, however it falls. And I think the chance of that is going up by shrinking the classification, expanding the playoffs. I think that chance is going up. But I also agree that if you beat somebody head to head and you're next to them on the seed line, then you probably earn that opportunity to adjust your team and where you're standing, rather than just let it fall where it may.
All right. Good discussion. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a motion. Is there a motion?
I move that we just have where your seeds, how would you word this? You know, your seed, you fall where you are, and there's no moving around.
So let me ask you this, Danny, is your motion that the bracket be seeded off the 4 data points and there is no adjusting the bracket?
Yeah, so I'll move the bracket be seeded off the 4 data points, no adjustment.
Okay. Thanks, Danny. Second.
I'll second.
Frank Reeves. Thanks, Frank. On the second. Discussion.
I would just add that if we're going to go to 24 out of 36 teams making the playoffs, then I think geography needs to be a consideration in the first round. The committee, that seating committee, needs to have that opportunity to look at if there's huge discrepancies, especially in some of these high seed, low seed games, that they need to have some discretion about where teams are going to travel. I think it goes directly to schools' budgets, which are going to be even tighter than they were in previous years, and just travel concerns and kids missing classes. So I would want that opportunity.
And that would just be for the first round matchups, correct, Luke?
Correct. After that, you're on your own.
We had geography in for seeds 9 through 16. Could you make that 18 through 24 or something like that?
But I think that's going against or adding to what's being proposed here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table. We have a second on the table. And we're talking about geography. So do we need to, we're talking about adding to it. So right now, the only motion on the table is 4 data points, seed the bracket, and we don't touch it.
And Luke, you're talking about doing, just add geography to the mix. Is that?
Yes. In the first round.
So are you saying something?
So that would be 16 through 20 or 17 through 24 could be adjusted based on geography, would be what Luke is saying.
Yes. And in other committees too, we've done where you could only move, you couldn't have huge adjustments, but you could move them just to bridge that gap so that the geography, I can't remember what the language was, but the geography was better. It may not be perfect, but you're not taking a low seed and moving them way up the bracket to make the geography perfect, if that makes sense.
So are you saying that we could only do, you could only move 1 spot? You could move 2 spots?
I think it's up for debate. I'd be curious to see what you guys think. And I don't know if this is something we can add on to this necessarily, but.
I mean, if I can, I mean, I would agree with that. I think with, adding a geography piece, because I think for, with the schools that are more rural, I could see that being a very valid point with geography. Instead of like league opponents, it might be better for 2 league opponents to play. So I don't know if I can amend my motion to add geography. I'm not sure how you would word that, but I would not be opposed to adding that in with the geography piece for more of the rural schools to make it easier for them to travel that first round.
So your motion would be amended to say that the bracket is set 1 through 24. Position 17 through 24 can be adjusted by X number of positions due to geography, and then we just need to figure out what X is.
And we also need to just define, I think, what geography is, because I think you could have schools saying, well, I got to travel an hour, and that's a lot for me. So in the past, we've also said maybe 200 miles was a good indicator.
I think maybe we need to look at how much we are actually going to increase the likelihood of league matchups happening with adjusting with geography too.
Ask this question. Again, we're talking about potential league matchups and everything else in the new classification. That's not next year. That's not next year. That's the cycle after that. So we still have another meeting in between. It doesn't take it. If the problem needs to be addressed right now, then we need to address the problem now. But that's just something to put in the back of your head.
How will this be affected if we go to 3 data points?
And Mark, you're talking about eliminating the coaches poll?
Correct.
I'm going to just tell you less data is worse. I understand absolutely the hesitation around the coaches poll, and I understand the discussion around that. I'm just letting you know the whole point of the 4 data point system is to get as much data as we could to see these teams. And if you start eliminating them, no matter which one it is, it's going to get less accurate.
I question a little bit putting geography into playoffs when we just voted to go 6 classifications, knowing that that's going to increase travel throughout your season. And we're okay with that, but now we say geography is really important to look at in the first round of playoffs. And those two things don't seem to jive very well.
Okay. So right now, the motion that we have on the table from Danny is 4 data points, seeds the bracket, and we don't adjust anything. We have Danny made the motion, and I believe John Sullivan seconded that. The question is, do we need to amend the motion or vote on the motion? Is there an amendment to the motion?
I'll leave the motion as is, and if we want to redo that, then we'll go from there. But I still feel like your seed should be your seed, and we'll go from there.
So you're saying you get what you get, don't throw a fit. Okay.
I would like to amend, I don't know the exact language, but I'd like to amend that there's a geography consideration.
Okay, so Luke is making an amendment, or is making a motion to amend the initial motion to add a geography piece. Is there a second to Luke's motion to add geography?
I'll second that.
All right, thanks, Greg. Okay, so now we're going to take a vote on whether we need to add a geography piece to it. At which point in time, Adam, do we need to actually have what the geography piece is, or are we voting on whether we should add geography to it at all? Does that make sense?
I think at this point, you're voting that we want to add language about geography, not so that we're not lost in the weeds as to the exact verbiage of that.
Thank you.
And that also would give us a year to go through and figure out exactly if that's 200 miles, 205 miles, 100 miles, whatever that is. That would give us until next December to plan that out, to vote on that.
So we are voting on the motion right now, whether to add a geography piece to it or not in terms of the seating. Sam, can you roll us?
Here we go. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tonjes,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Brian Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
Yes.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones,
Yes.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
Yes.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
Joe Heedley.
Yes.
So the motion carries 14-0 that we are going to add a geography piece to the seating And that's an amendment to Danny's motion. Okay.
Right.
So now what we are voting on is the 4 data points are used to seed the bracket. We're not going to move anybody due to league matchups or for any other reason other than geography. Did I say that correctly? Boy, you guys are a pretty confident group.
You say that one more time, Chris.
Yes, we're going to use the 4 data points to seed the playoff bracket. We are not going to move teams for any other reason other than geography, as amended by Luke DeWolf and voted in unanimously by this group. That's where I see we are at. Adam, do you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're essentially voting for the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You voted to add the language. Now you've got to vote for all the language to be put in.
Out of the language. Yep. Okay.
Okay. So basically what we're saying is that teams aren't going to be flopped for league. That's yes. Okay, here we go. Good.
Are we ready?
No discussion. No discussion. Roll us, Sam.
All right. Danny Philman,
Yes.
Marty Tonjes,
Yes.
Bruce Gross,
Yes.
John Sullivan,
Yes.
Autumn Sereno,
Yes.
Ryan Goddard,
Yes.
Luke DeWolf,
Yes.
Gary Geiger,
No.
Frank Reeves,
Yes.
Greg Jones,
No.
Jared Hinton,
Yes.
Brian Dermer,
No.
Mark Lowther,
Yes.
and Joe Heagley.
No.
So Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, that motion carries 10 yes votes, 4 nay votes, correct?
Correct. That's what I have.
Okay, so that means moving forward, we're not going to move teams unless it's based off geography. Now, Adam, does that go into effect for 21 or is that the next cycle?
My assumption is this cycle has already been set into motion, so this would be for the next cycle, beginning with the fall 22 season.
Okay. I do believe we're going to need to, yeah. We're good. Okay. All right. We are now moving to 8.0, media exposure and coverage. And Danny, I'm going to just go ahead and turn 8.1, generate more statewide coverage, as well as 8.2, foundation showcase Four Corners games. I'm going to turn it over to you, Danny.
Right on. Well, as I stated, I don't know, I was talking to Adam a little bit or emailing with our media coverage for high school sports is awful here. And sorry, Ryan, not to knock on you at all, but it's a positive thing in our kids, in athletes. And if we want more exposure and more people excited, we got to get the media involved somehow. And I know Colorado Springs, talking to the guys down the Springs, you guys have really great media coverage. And that was evident when we went down and played Pine Creek. We got more just media coverage and tweets and stuff like that playing down at Gary Berry Stadium than we did up here at all. The goal is in 10 years be a top 5 in the country, and yep, our media coverage is lacking. So that's something I'm not sure how to address it. But I know in other states they have Friday night shows where it's just not like one division, it's all division. It'd be nice to hear what 6A or 6-man is doing. Being new to Colorado, I don't know those schools, and I know the state I came from, we knew about all the little schools too, because it was in the media. And how we generate that, what avenue we need to take there. I'm not exactly sure, but there needs to be a push to do a statewide media to get our programs spotlighted from top to bottom, top division to six man, to generate excitement around the state for it and get people talking about, high school football in Colorado. There's just not that here. Games of the week being televised. I know Altitude, I think my first year here, there's Altitude. I know there's some contracts, media contracts, stuff like that, but just trying to drum up and create more excitement about high school football in Colorado and getting that on the national stage is huge. And we just don't have that as a whole, as a state. In areas we do. And granted, talking with Ryan and Chris down in Springs right there, you guys do have great coverage. It's not here. It's not in the Denver area, which is shocking. So I don't know if that's the Denver Post. I don't know, Ryan, Casey, if you can help us with that. States do a big deal making out who makes the playoffs, where here we get a tweet that says, hey, you made the playoffs, instead of a playoff reveal show or something that's going to create excitement to kick off the season. Even having, foundation games where we're pitted against, teams are pitted against other states or in a big venue, just to, again, create excitement. Or I had a coach from Arizona contact me about, hey, try and create a Four Corners game where we're taking league winners or big matchups from, each of the Four Corner state. And it doesn't have to be the Four Corners. It could be, the states around us, but just trying to create more excitement. If we want this to be the best or one of the best states for high school football, we got to get more coverage, and it's got to be throughout the state, and just not, now 6A coverage. It's got to be 6-man coverage. It's got to be 8-man coverage. Yeah. Plays of the week, voting on, highlight of the week, just for people to get excited about high school football. And it's just not there as a whole for a state.
Thanks, Danny.
I think they're all great points, and I appreciate you bringing it up so that it's, in the minutes, that is something that we need to figure out, as an association, as a state as a whole. How can we do more to promote the game? I will tell you, in that national rules meeting I was on, that was brought up repeatedly as well, that we've got to continue to fight the fight to promote this game. The rules have been put in place for safety, all those different things. We need to continue to emphasize those. And I think it's a natural segue into how do we continue to build that brand of what Colorado football is across our state. So I thank you for bringing it up. I don't know that there's an action item per se for us today on setting our path forward on how to do this, but it is something that's relevant, and it is something that we need to speak to and address, and to begin to formulate plans on how to help increase those coverages. We have some folks that do a great job covering our sports in this state, and how do we help them elevate that to the next level, and what does that mean for us as well? What portion of that do we take on? Those are things that they're going to be important going forward. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Adam, a question real quick.
Yep.
One of the main issues of getting anything in the media is finding somebody to sponsor it. Whether it's on the radio, it's on TV, or whatever it is, somebody's got to sponsor it. With our affiliation with NFHS, would it be in prudence to be in partnership with them and have them sponsor something on like a state TV, like an Altitude or something like that, and have them be the main sponsor? That way they could get out there. That's where the CHSAA playoffs are, and maybe connect those two together and use them as a title sponsor for that, so we can maybe get something like that going.
I think it's all conversations that we can bring up to those in our office that write our media contracts and deal with that portion of the work of the association. That's certainly something we can bring up and see exactly how that works out. I don't have those contracts in front of me. I'm not privy to those conversations on what our media contracts look like, but I do not have any hesitation in asking, how can we do this better?
And then, Adam, I just want to take a second to, just highlight what Ryan and Dan Moorman do, as well as Kevin Schaefer at Colorado Preps, as well as those local media people, for the work and the spotlighting and the highlighting that they do of their local areas. Because, as we talked the other day, there's a lot of great coverage that happens And a lot of it comes from that CHSAA Now office. A lot of it comes from local areas, but in addition to what Kevin Schaefer does as well. So just as to get it in the minutes, get it recognized, all those things, but also just show my appreciation.
Thank you, Ryan. I agree. We are fortunate to have that crew. And obviously, as Danny said, we in Southern Colorado, we're pretty fortunate. Our biggest issue on Friday night is which one of the 4 media outlets are we going to watch, and then figure out which Twitter we're going to jump on. It's because it's been guaranteed they're going to get great coverage. So, Jared.
There should be a lot more content now too with live streaming people than if they just network in the footage that's received. So it should be, whoever can take that on, they should have a lot more content now than there ever has been.
All right. Good. Thanks, Danny. And yes, Adam, I'm not sure there's an action item on there, but more discussion than anything. Okay. That brings us, so Danny, thank you. That takes us to agenda item 9.0, additional items. Anything for the good of the order from this group?
Yes, six-man football is going to bring forth a proposal to a bylaw for the 4 data points to be used for qualification of teams for football. With that being said, is there any classifications that do not want to be part of that? We don't want to write something that's going to include a classification that doesn't want to be part of the 4 data points as part of qualification, but we are definitely going to write that for 6-man.
So let me just ask the question, Joe. Point of clarification, please. You're saying that the field is set off of the 4 data points rather than just the RPI?
Yes, sir. We're planning on writing bylaws, and we should be able to get support from every 6-man league.
Is that, Adam, does that go through the football committee, or is that
No, that is actually through the board. That's a board policy that we're using RPI. So a league can bring that forward and get that voted on. So essentially what Joe is saying is 6-man is going to propose that moving forward, football operate the way it did during this COVID year, where the 4 data points set the field and seeded it. Is that correct, Joe?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that proposal is going to go to the board of directors.
Yes,
and
sir.
You're asking, is there any other classification that wants to go to that? So when you go to the board of directors, you can say 6-man plus boom, boom, boom.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks, Joe. I just wanted to clarify.
So what we'll do with that is those on the committee or those that are watching on YouTube, et cetera, if you have thoughts on that, I would just have you reach out directly to Joe, and he can work with you and the 6-man group on how to get that accomplished, if that's your wish and desire to move that forward to the board.
Okay. Thank you. Additional items for the good of the order.
Yeah, Chris, we briefly talked like spring football, and actually Luke DeWolf brought up a point about nothing really in the bylaws saying we couldn't do like a jamboree where we're getting 4 teams together to practice for college showcases. I just wanted to see if, like Luke, I guess get clarification from you and make sure that we're all on the same page. If we were to set up a practice where colleges to come by, is there, do we need to formalize spring football if there's nothing in there about that? I know we can throw the ball around, but is there, I just would like to kind of revisit that. And I know, Luke, you kind of spoke up about that, just and it kind of stuck with me. And I just want to kind of get clarification on that.
So by no means am I the bylaw expert or could I guess be the one to say that this could or couldn't happen. So I guess my comment was basically that I'm not aware of anything that would prevent that. But again, I think would have to go through Adam. It would need to go through the CHSAA commissioners, and they would need to weigh in and look at the bylaws specifically and see if there's anything that allows or doesn't allow that. But there was just nothing that I was aware of, and it sounds similar to the things that go on already with basketball.
I would agree with Luke. Where I think we need to tread lightly on this one for this particular year is just in looking back at what we did at the beginning of this meeting in addressing what the equity piece and the safety piece with spring football and things like that. I do think this is something, if we want to vet out and really build a plan, I'm with you, Danny. I think it's something we need to do. I also think that this is probably something to try to formalize and build and shape what that looks like. In a one afternoon meeting is probably not in the best interest of our association. I think it's something that we can work together and we can build a subcommittee if you want to get that formal with it, but exactly what something like that would look like and how that would be proposed and worked on. I'm right there with you and working with that. I don't know that it's something that necessarily has to be agreed upon as a football committee. So I think it's something that we can help build and shape and mold and get exactly what that would look like.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just trying to get, guidance on it. And again, we talk about getting our kids out there and get them seen. We got to have it coincide with the NCAA guidelines and their time period. So that'd be my only thing. So I'm not sure where we go from there, but I'd be more than happy to, help out with that. And
definitely, we've got that 45-day window there where they're allowed to go out and evaluate, and it doesn't necessarily coincide with what our calendar looks like. And so how do we recognize that conflict and build out upon that within our current structure and bylaws? I'm with you. So let's get together. I see Jared's on here too. I know Jared's coached at that level as I have and used those evaluation periods to go out and get to see guys. So we can get a few folks together and really build out exactly what that would look like.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Good. Any additional thoughts, ideas under 9.0 additional items? All right. Number 10, moving right along to number 10, Mr. Bright, recommendation of new committee members.
Yeah, so this is just for you guys that are on the committee and those that are watching or watching this later on. We are going to have some committee spots that are going to open up. We have 4 gentlemen that are leaving, but we also have a new classification that we need to try and have equal representation amongst all of our classifications. So if you have someone that you're interested in or you believe would serve the committee well, please send that information over as we begin that process going forward over the next several months. Just send those names to my attention and we'll begin working on what that looks like.
Thank you, sir. And is it safe for me to say that you will be in contact with this group as we start to look at breaking teams down into leagues and classifications and all that good stuff? That
yes.
You'll start, once you get wrestling up and going and making sure that that's rolling with it.
Yes, that is the case. And I would like to go ahead and just recognize our 4 guys that I show that are going to be leaving the committee with their term expiring. Again, I was handed this information, so if the dates on here are wrong, I apologize, but I show Mr. Gross from Vista Ridge, Coach Goddard at Pueblo South, Mr. Geiger at TCA, and Mr. Dermer at Marino have all fulfilled their duties on serving this committee and are those that would be exiting the committee this year. So guys, I appreciate you. I'm sure when you signed up 3 years ago, you didn't think we'd have a worldwide pandemic to try to figure out football through. And you have good timing because you're exiting right when we begin to discuss what 6A football is going to look like and all the changes that you just approved today. Thank you guys for your work. Thank you guys for being something that I can lean on and count on. And I think you've been monumental in helping to move football forward. So I appreciate you guys and the work you've done. And that goes to all of you on the committee as well that are staying. Thank you for the work. It hasn't been the easiest, but we're going to continue to push. We're going to continue to raise the ceiling. And as I told you yesterday, I look forward to working together and continue to be a group that says, yeah, and instead of yeah, but. And I think with that, we can really push this to the next level and continue pushing and making this the best experience for all of our students and student athletes across the state of Colorado. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Adam. And I could not echo more Adam's sentiments, and I'll give my thank yous when we get to the Legislative Council. And at that time, that's when I will thank our folks that are leaving. So thank you to all of you for a productive meeting. Adam will be in touch in terms of our next steps, classification leagues, all those kind of good things, because that is going to be a heavy lift, and it's going to be a rather quick lift. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and not a ton of time to get it done. So we will be in touch. I appreciate you guys. Anything else for the good of the order?
Adam, I just want to thank you for leading this committee, Chris, you too. And just thank you for the other members that have served on this committee. So I really appreciate all of you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, guys. This committee's in good hands. Appreciate you all.
Thanks, Ryan.
I'd echo that too. Been just a real joy to work with you.
Thanks, Gary.
I do the same. It's been a pleasure working with you guys and gonna miss it. Thank you.
All right. I guess I need a motion to adjourn.
On my way out, I'll motion to adjourn.
Attaboy. Motion to adjourn by Ryan Goddard. Second.
I'll second.
Second by Luke DeWolf. Thumbs up for those in favor. Those opposed. You guys, thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.